Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable, see playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2921, Fusing. It was known that without certain things like the soul-binding thread, it was difficult to kill the souls of light. Luckily, the souls of light who threatened Zen weren't anyone truly important, so he naturally didn't bother to waste his time on dealing with them. He had more important things to do. After the souls of light disappeared, Elvenia came out of the dark region with Dorothy in tow. Then, the three of them walked towards the entrance of the Grand Sky Temple. The bearing race were almost finished with all the preparation work in front of the Grand Sky Temple. Today, they would open the temple if everything went according to the plan. However, the most recent thing that had just happened was a shock to all the members of various races. The souls of light of the bearing race, Sun Crow race, and Divine Farmer race all had left. Only the souls of light from some small races decided to stay and watch what would happen next. These people escaped fast, Zen said with a shake of his head. After Zen had walked around the Grand Sky Temple once, he asked Dorothy and Elvenia to wait for a while. He wanted to return to the other shore with his soul of light. When the two ladies had settled down, his physical body disappeared from the other shore. "Where is Zen? Is he gone?" Elvenia asked in confusion. Dorothy looked at Elvenia helplessly and replied, "He has left the other shore." Left the other shore? Elvenia thought for a while and seemed to understand what had happened. "Will he come back then?" "Of course he will," Dorothy said firmly. Zen's body and soul were separated on the other shore. Sometimes, he needed to switch between the two forms. Before he had entered the Grand Sky Temple, he had left his soul of light at the Grand Sky Temple's entrance. Right now, he was probably planning to return to the other shore with his soul of light. A few moments later, he had finally gotten out of the other shore. His eyelids fluttered slightly before fully opening, after which he saw a scene in the room on the second floor. Not far away was Dorothy, who sat with her legs crossed, and Elvenia. Sadness hung like a thick cloud over Margaret and Letitia, who stood in the corner of the room. Letitia in particular looked much thinner than before, as they had been worrying about Zen every day and night. He couldn't help but feel the stab of pain in his heart as he watched them quietly. Fortunately, he already came out of the dark region and would return soon. He couldn't let Dorothy and Elvenia wait too long now. As Zen thought of it, he activated the truth of godly way and returned to the other shore with his soul of light. Letitia mumbled. She felt the truth aura that emanated from Zen, but it was quite faint. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she gazed at her husband's closed eyes. After Zen had entered the other shore in the form of soul of light, the three of them moved forward on the right side of the Grand Sky Temple. They needed to go back to the other side of the other shore to find a way to remove the soul-binding thread that was wrapped around Dorothy. Halfway through their journey, the three of them had reached the narrowest area of the light region on the other shore. The areas at the two sides of the road belonged to the dark region. "Wait," Zen blurted out as he walked towards the edge of the dark region. "What?" Elvenia was able to freely enter and exit the dark region, but Dorothy was still a little scared when she saw the place. "There is one other shore token that I need to merge within the dark region," Zen told Dorothy. Something flashed in Dorothy's eyes. "What other shore token needs to be merged within the dark region?" she asked. "Something from the dark region, of course," Zen said with a smile. "Another shore token from the dark region?" Dorothy didn't know much about the dark region. When Zen was trapped in the dark region, she had done a lot of research about it using various materials. The materials were highly detailed, and they mentioned something about the other shore tokens in the dark region. The other shore tokens there possessed strong other shore power, but it was very difficult to merge with them because everything in the dark region clashed with the light region. In history, a small number of people had obtained other shore tokens of the dark region. The process of merging with them had always remained a secret. "Don't worry, I will use candles," Zen replied. "Candles?" Dorothy was surprised. She didn't expect that those candles would have such use. Now, Zen knew that Dorothy held a lot of doubts in her mind. He didn't intend to conceal anything from her though, so he said, "I'll tell you everything after we leave the other shore." Then, he asked Elvenia to take out a candle and light it up with the divine flames of the Sun Crow race. After that, he took the candle and walked towards the dark region. The road in the middle that separated the dark region into two parts was the only path that connected the two ends of stage 13. There were a lot of souls of light that came and passed by on the road, and Zen's actions immediately caught many of their attentions. "Look, there are 3 humans over there. What are they doing? That human has lit up a candle. Is he taking a candle to walk to the dark region?" The souls of light who were watching the scene were all dumbfounded. They all thought that the dark region was an absolutely forbidden area, and merely going near it would completely destroy the souls of light. Therefore, what Zen was doing was the same as looking for death. Despite that, Zen really walked into the darkness with his candle just like that. Soon enough, the candle had illuminated the endless darkness. The souls of light who watched him were stunned. They couldn't believe their eyes, and they didn't understand what was happening. "Let's go there and take a look. These humans are really capable. Go and ask them how they did it." Quote. It wasn't long before more and more souls of light gathered around, until they were too many to count. After all, they naturally wanted to find out the secrets that had made such a bizarre thing to happen. Some of them began to have greedy thoughts. They thought that if it was necessary, it was also a good choice to directly attack them. When Zen had entered the dark region, he told Elvenia to keep guard and prevent any other souls of light from going near. Thus, Elvenia scowled at the sight of those souls of light who were approaching them. "If you dare come closer, don't blame me when I attack," she hissed. As soon as her voice rang out, she forcefully stomped her foot down and the ground beneath her immediately sank. Only then did the souls of light clearly see what this human woman was capable of. And they could see her face and features clearly. Was she a creature on the other shore? But she was clearly a human. Rumor had it from stage 13 that someone had entered the other shore with a physical body. That body, however, was clearly in the shape of a human man, and the man wasn't a creature of the other shore. What was going on with this human girl? Then again, no matter what might be the case, the souls of light didn't dare to go forward. Judging from the power that she had just unleashed, it seemed that it was easy for her to kill them. In the end, the souls of light just retreated and watched them from afar instead. Meanwhile, Zen had successfully entered the dark region. His eyes cautiously scanned his new surroundings. The creatures in the dark region were afraid of the light region, and had no desire to approach it. Fortunately, the edges of the area were already desolate, so he didn't need to worry about being attacked by the creatures of the dark region. Even if he did get attacked, he still could escape to the light region with the candle. After Zen had placed the candle on the ground and got ready, he asked Elvenia to hand over the civilization artifact to him. It was important for him to remember that the regal jade spirit had also warned him to prevent exposing the civilization artifact to the light region. Even if the civilization artifact was extremely solid, it would still be hard for it to withstand the light from the light region because the light could extinguish it in a short amount of time. On the other hand, the light of the candle could also corrode the civilization artifact, but the candlelight's energy wasn't that strong, so the civilization artifact could still withstand it. After Zen had taken over the civilization artifact, his soul of light activated the truth of cultivation nature, then slowly fused the civilization artifact with his soul of light. Before, he was a little worried and afraid that the truth of cultivation nature and the civilization artifact would clash with each other. Now that he was proven wrong and the civilization artifact was successfully fused into his body, he realized that his anxiety was totally unnecessary. Yet, merging with it was only the first step. The next step was to make his inner world carry the civilization artifact, and only then would he be considered to have truly possessed this other shore token. Chapter 2922, Mess. After merging with the civilization artifact, Zen headed for the other end of the other shore with Elvenia and Dorothy. Dorothy had been confused, but she decided it was better not to ask questions. Instead, she meekly followed Zen's lead. Once they made it to the other end of the other shore, Zen went straight to the auction house of the ear mice. There, he found them moping desolately. They had even stopped the auction. They took a hard blow when they opened the Grand Sky Temple for exploration last time, which lowered their morale considerably. When Dorothy emerged from the Grand Sky Temple, she had returned the souls of light of the ear mice to them. Nobody knew how the latter would help the said souls of light withdraw from the other shore. Upon seeing Zen and Dorothy approaching, the ear mice perked up a little. However, when they saw Elvenia with them, they were all surprised. Their whiskers wiggled in curiosity. Eager to know more about this elegant lady's background, they pestered Zen with countless questions about her. But Zen refused to answer, and Elvinia herself ignored them as well. Then, Zen had cut to the chase. He told them why they were really there, to remove the soul-binding thread from Dorothy. To his pleasant surprise, the ear mice cooperated enthusiastically. While the soul-binding thread was quite troublesome, there were multiple ways to remove it. The ear mice took out a mysterious liquid and sprinkled some on Dorothy. After they waited for around an hour, the soul-binding thread gradually disappeared. Zen tried to pay the ear mice with soul pills, but they firmly refused. Although they had failed in the exploration of the Grand Sky Temple, the ear mice thought it would be good if they made friends with Zen. In their eyes, Zen was the spokesperson of Thad. Whether they were one and the same person, it didn't matter. What was important was that the ear mice could communicate with Thad through Zen. The ear mice gently reminded Zen that when the Bering race tried to buy information from them about Zen's body, they had refused. While the reputation of the ear mice wasn't great, Zen believed them. After all, he knew they were only after communication with Thad. To the ear mice, the benefits that Thad would bring them would be far greater than the riches offered by the Bering race. After this, Zen took Elvinia and Dorothy back to the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace. Unless they were in a temple or the dark region, souls of light could easily withdraw from the other shore. But this time, the circumstances were different. Elvinia had entered the other shore with her soul of light, but after she became a purified being, she now had a body. In essence, she was still a soul on the other shore, and her real body was still in the source world. Nobody knew if she would be able to leave the other shore. What would happen to the purified being's body after she made it out of the other shore? Do you still remember the illusion-breaking rune? Zen asked gently. The illusion-breaking rune, what's that? Elvinia asked, blinking confusedly. Zen had expected this. Luckily, the illusion-breaking rune wasn't difficult to learn. He patiently taught her the spell, and she obediently learned and recited it. Dorothy watched this scene silently, recalling what happened in the Sea of Truth. When Zen just arrived at the Sea of Truth, he didn't even know what the illusion-breaking rune was. Back then, it was Dorothy who taught him the illusion-breaking rune. When they were trapped in the dark region, she was allowed to leave. However, this depressed her a little bit. She'd have preferred to stay in the dark region, if it meant she could be by Zen's side. Even if this meant becoming a fool, like what happened to Elvinia, she would have been willing to go through it all to be with Zen. Snapping back to reality, Dorothy turned to watch Elvinia remaster the illusion-breaking rune. Although Elvinia's memory was an absolute mess, she was still talented. After reciting it a few times, she had fully mastered it. With her eyes closed, Elvinia sat still and activated the rune. Elvinia, Elvinia, Zen shook her by the shoulders gently, but received no response. He and Dorothy exchanged surprised looks. It seemed that Elvinia's soul of light had left the other shore, but her body as a purified being remained there. We should leave, too, Dorothy suggested. Zen nodded. No matter what, the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace was safe. Even if there was trouble brewing, the other souls of light were probably not strong enough to hurt Elvinia's unconscious body. Ah, in the room on the second floor of Zen's house, Elvinia moaned as she slowly opened her eyes. Hearing this, Letitia and Margaret exchanged excited glances. Then, they both turned to stare at Elvinia. She woke up. Letitia cried excitedly. How about Zen? Is he awake? All of a sudden, all of their worries revolved around their beloved husband. Margaret rushed to Zen's side. She didn't care whether Elvinia had woken up or not. Zen was all that mattered to her in this moment. Elvinia frowned. She sat up and stretched awkwardly. In a low voice, she muttered, "This body is so weak." The purified being's body back on the other shore was much stronger than her own. Naturally, she felt a little uncomfortable with her old body. However, the purified being's body was an item from the other shore, so she was unable to bring it back to the source world. If she merged with that body as an other shore token, she could bring it to the source world, but her soul was in the purified being's body. This was complicated. Zen had just returned to his physical body when he heard Margaret's and Letitia's anxious cries. With a smile, he reached out his hands to them. Letitia and Margaret were caught off guard. They screamed for joy and pounced onto Zen. They didn't say anything more and just leaned on Zen's chest, quietly enjoying the serenity. Dorothy had also woken up at this point. Opening her eyes to this scene, she felt a little awkward. She had stayed in the Flow Sword sect for a while, so she knew about Zen's wives. However, even then, she felt a little depressed watching him coddle them. "Hey, why are you hugging him?" Elvinia's cold voice cut through the air. Her memory was still jumbled up, she didn't remember anything about the Oneness Sky Palace. In fact, Zen was the only thing she was sure of. Seeing Letitia and Margaret in Zen's arms, Elvinia narrowed her eyes in irritation. Letitia gave her a funny look, but didn't answer. On the other hand, Margaret glared at Elvinia in disgust. In her eyes, this was the woman who had put Zen through all that trouble on the other shore. Actually, he had almost died there. How dare Elvinia question her haughtily? So, what if I hug him? Zen is my husband, Margaret said indignantly. Elvinia blinked slowly, as if ruminating the meaning of the word, husband. Then, as though it suddenly dawned on her, her eyes flashed and she suddenly yanked Zen towards her. From now on, he is my husband. You are not allowed to touch him. Margaret's jaw dropped dumbfoundedly. She looked at Elvinia as though she was an idiot. On the other hand, Letitia was very perceptive. She sensed something was off with Elvinia. Turning to Zen with inquisitive eyes, she silently asked him for an explanation. Dorothy buried her face in her hands and sighed helplessly. This truly was such a mess. Chapter 2923, Token Bearing. Without wasting any time, Flamen rushed over from the Phoenix Palace. When she saw Elvinia had already woken up, she broke into tears of joy. She immediately walked towards Elvinia and embraced her. At this point, Elvinia spoke. In a cold voice she asked, "Who are you? Why are you hugging me? Do I know you?" Flamen was stunned by this reaction. She looked at Elvinia and with a questioning look upon her face, she turned to Zen. A little while ago, Zen had already explained what happened to Letitia and the others. Now, he had to recount the events for Flamen's sake. While we were in the dark region, a purified being occupied Elvinia's soul, Zen instantly told Flamen. Surprisingly, Flamen responded to this very calmly. "I am aware of it," she said. "You know about it?" Zen asked. He was thoroughly intrigued. Flamen nodded. The purified being in the dark region actually wanted to take Elvinia's soul away. However, I was able to kill him. After hearing that, Zen finally saw the whole picture. He now understood what had truly happened. Previously, he had been wondering about why Teague had failed to take Elvinia's soul, since his soul was so much stronger than hers. Zen thought that Elvinia would die when she fell into the tomb. Much to his surprise, she became a purified being instead. What happened after that? Flamen asked. She was obviously still confused as she brought her gaze back to Elvinia. Elvinia emerged as she is right now. She has become a purified being and has obtained a new body on the other shore. She is now very powerful, Zen replied while staring at Elvinia as well. With that, a hint of surprise streaked across Flamen's face. She was aware that this would be too troublesome because there was a huge disturbance in Elvinia's soul. Moreover, she didn't know what would happen next. No one had ever experienced something like this before. "Do you know how strong she is now? Is she stronger than you?" Flamen asked curiously and looked at Zen. "She's a lot stronger and powerful than my body. There is no one in stage 13 that can defeat her. In addition to that, she is able to kill any creature in the dark region in an instant," Zen admitted as he stared back at her. Elvinia's physical body on the other shore was already far stronger than Zen's. He didn't know whether she could stand against the three-eyed boy and the giant ape. But even if they were stronger than Elvinia, she had the ability to activate the great Sanskrit light. The creatures in the dark region had no power to fight back under the light. Will she be able to leave stage 13? Flamen continued to ask once more. A purified being was a creature from the other shore. They usually inhabited and dominated a certain stage. There were purified beings existing in the upper stages of the other shore as well. Nevertheless, they could only stay in their respective stages regardless of their strength and power. If Elvinia could make it to the upper stages, then her identity as a purified being would have absolute significance. Zen hadn't thought about this possibility before. With that he said, "The moment we left the dark region, we withdrew from the other shore. We still haven't tried it yet." "I understand," Flamen said with a nod. Bringing her gaze back to Elvinia, she gently caressed her face. "It appears that when I vanquished the purified being, his soul of light remained in Elvinia's soul and merged with her memory flame. Is there any way for her to recover from this?" Zen inquired with unabated curiosity. "The memory flame is very fragile and complicated. I am sure there is a way. However, the process will be very troublesome," said Flamen carefully. Zen had already borne witness to many memory flames before. The memory flames in the Divine Land had created an ocean. Laquisha's memory flame was once taken out and then given back. However, these memory flames were complete and intact while Elvinia's was broken. Fortunately, the Oneness Sky Palace had no shortage of very talented people. They would find a way to fix this problem. Come back to the Phoenix Palace with me. I am extremely worried about you these days, said Flamen to Elvinia with so much pity and longing in her eyes. Shockingly, Elvinia pushed her away and said loudly, I won't go anywhere with you. I don't even know you. I have to stay with my husband. What do you mean by husband? Flamen demanded. Her facial expression darkened. Even though Flamen had much appreciation of Zen, her daughter was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Elvinia was the princess of the Phoenix Palace. How could she call Zen her husband? With that said, Flamen began to wonder what Zen had done to her daughter. Dorothy, Letitia, and the others glanced at Zen and grinned. Zen had already explained to them that Elvinia had been quite dependent on him after she climbed out of the tomb. Zen felt embarrassed by this. Once again, he had to explain it for Flamen's benefit. It had been established that Elvinia had lost her memory. So now, she was much like a 6-year-old girl and depended on him by instinct. Flamen wouldn't leave Elvinia here. She was demon-bent on finding a cure for her. She proceeded to ignore Elvinia's refusal. She stretched out her forefinger and gently touched Elvinia's forehead. This made Elvinia fall into a deep sleep. It was true that Elvinia was invincible on the other shore. However, she had no power to fight back against Flamen. And so, she was carried off to the Phoenix Palace by her mother. Dorothy also left after she grasped the gist of everything that happened in the dark region. However, she appeared downcast right before she left. Zen's return was a cause for celebration. His courtyard house became lively again. During the past few days, Letitia and Margaret were severely worried about Zen. Trish and Carrie felt uneasy as well. They were all tired and dispirited. But now that he was back, they felt relieved and excited. Zen felt a little guilty that he caused them to suffer over the past days. In order to make up for it, he accompanied them all day long. A week later, he chose to cultivate in seclusion. Merging with the civilization artifact was now his top priority. It was too important to be put off any longer. The earlier he merged with it, the earlier he could feel relaxed. In addition to being a powerful other shore token, the civilization artifact also contained a flaw of the godly way's great unity. Truth be told, Zen was more interested in this flaw rather than the other shore token itself. Swoosh. Slowly and steadily, the truth of cultivation nature was spreading inside Zen's inner world. All at once, the entirety of his inner world became more harmonious and smooth while it underwent this process. The creatures in the inner world were unable to comprehend the truth of godly way. However, even just the aura released from the truth of godly way would graciously benefit many talented beings. With the intention of breaking through under the aura, there were warriors and true gods with outstanding talent that began to cultivate in seclusion. During that time when Zen merged with the strength god totem, his inner world experienced an extremely strong pressure. This was the effect of that terrifying other shore power. Compared to that, it was much quieter when he merged with the civilization artifact. It also looked as though the civilization artifact was just an ordinary diamond-shaped handicraft. Nevertheless, the entire 1,000 Sanskrit land trembled the moment it appeared. Buzz. The Sanskrit words were bathed in golden light as they began to flash. 104 Sanskrit words lit up all over the 1,000 Sanskrit land when the truth of goodwill and malice merged with the eye of will. And then, 140 Sanskrit words lit up during the time that the truth of eternal sword intent merged with the strength god totem. This time, however, a total of 366 Sanskrit words lit up when the truth of cultivation nature merged with the civilization artifact. Swish. With each Sanskrit word that shone, a chain would stretch out. And so, 366 chains shot out. Afterwards, these chains had wrapped around the civilization artifact. It's possible that the civilization artifact is not considered as another shore token from the Lust world, Zen murmured as he looked at the civilization artifact nearby. In principle, the other shore tokens found in the Lust world could be applied to the 100 Sanskrit land regardless of how powerful they were. Take the strength god totem for example. It was another shore token from stage 13 that only needed 140 Sanskrit words to bear it. Ha. Zen suddenly heard a soft laughter. It was the regal jade spirit that laughed. The sound came from the civilization artifact. It said, "This is the result of us hiding in stage 13 and being suppressed by the rules. Otherwise, even the 1,000 Sanskrit land might fail to bear it." Chapter 2924, The Blood Essence Godly Way. In fact, it was possible for creatures in upper stages on the other shore to enter lower stages. However, they had to pay a high price for this and their strength would be limited by the rules of the stages. The regal jade civilization was superior to many other civilizations. Naturally, its members were by no means weak. If its members were allowed to use their powers untethered, Zen wouldn't stand a chance. Just the power of a regal jade bug alone could kill Zen instantly without using any poison. Zen gritted his teeth. He felt the chains straining. Just as he thought he would make it, he suddenly heard a loud crack. One of the chains had snapped. Crack, crack, crack. Just as the first chain broke, the others followed suit. In the blink of an eye, 8 chains had snapped. Zen knitted his brows in frustration. Previously, it had been extremely smooth for him to merge with the Eye of Will and the Strength God Totem. He hadn't expected that merging with the civilization artifact would have any hitches. Once the chains broke, the Sanskrit words on the other side dimmed slightly. What's going on? Zen frowned. Your 1000 Sanskrit land is not solid enough, the regal jade spirit explained. What? It's not solid enough? Zen echoed in shock. He remembered that ever since he built the 1000 Sanskrit land, almost everyone who encountered it had thought it was solid. If his 1000 Sanskrit land wasn't solid enough, the ones built by the people with the same cultivation base as him might even be worse. Let me help you, the regal jade spirit said graciously. It used to be the sun of truth. Moreover, the civilization artifact itself was very special and needed to be handled with care. Even if Zen managed to successfully merge with it, he wouldn't be able to control it fully. The regal jade spirit was bound to the civilization artifact, and could also control it. Whoosh! The civilization artifact floating in the air suddenly flashed a cyan light. In a flash, the light transformed into cyan chains. The chains coiled around the civilization artifact and then extended to the edge of Zen's inner world, effectively merging with the Sanskrit words. The golden chains created by Sanskrit words continued to snap, one by one. However, each time one broke, a cyan one would replace it. After replacing around 40 chains, the civilization artifact finally stabilized in Zen's inner world. With that, Zen had successfully merged with the civilization artifact. Suddenly, he could easily read the information hidden within the civilization artifact. He understood its writing, background and development. He had caught a glimpse into the regal jade civilization previously. The regal jade spirit had activated the artifact to show him back in the dark region. But now, Zen seemed to grasp a full understanding of the regal jade civilization. Once Zen finished reading the information, he sensed a strange energy within the civilization artifact. The energy was as red as blood. It floated in the air, forming a huge and unfamiliar red Sanskrit word. What is this Sanskrit word? Zen asked curiously. This is an unknown Sanskrit word, the regal jade spirit replied indifferently. Zen raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? What's it for then? Some Sanskrit words contained important information, such as the truth enlightenment of the truth of eternal sword intent. On the other hand, some were meaningless with no significance at all. But why did the regal jade spirit summon this Sanskrit word? Moreover, the energy contained in this Sanskrit word made Zen feel even more uneasy. You don't need to understand this Sanskrit word, the regal jade spirit replied. It was like this when the Wing King found it. You only need its energy, anyway. It is one of the flaws of the godly way's great unity. It's also a godly way, separate from the 3,000 ones in the chaos. A godly way separate from the 3,000 ones. Zen echoed, dumbfounded. 3,000 was not always the exact number. Different masters had different ways of summarizing godly ways. The 3,000 godly ways included all the energy in the chaos apart from the other shore power. They included the flowers, trees, birds, beasts, the heaven, the earth, the sun, the moon and the 5 elements. Zen was well aware of this. However, the regal jade spirit was telling him that there was a new godly way. This is truly unbelievable, number 9527 said uneasily. Previously, when Zen had merged with the Eye of Will and the Strength God Totem, number 9527 was completely disinterested. However, now, it was extremely intrigued by the civilization artifact. After all, the regal jade spirit used to be as strong as No 9527's master. Number 9527 had been quietly observing from the depths within Zen's mind. It could no longer conceal its shock at what was unfolding before them. It was even inclined to believe that its master would be shocked, too, if he were here to see what they were seeing. This demonic red energy was nowhere to be found whenever the chaos was born and destroyed time and time again. It was no wonder the godly way's great unity hadn't been realized. What is this mysterious energy called? Zen asked. The regal jade civilization doesn't have the concept of the godly ways. Correspondingly, we have 2,800 essence powers. This blood-red energy is called the blood essence power, the regal jade spirit explained. If that's so, can I call it the blood essence godly way? Zen asked. Whatever, the regal jade spirit replied disinterestedly. The name itself didn't matter. What mattered was the meaning hidden behind the name. The blood essence godly way was now one of the godly ways. It might not be powerful, because like the other godly ways, it couldn't compare to other shore power. However, it made up for a flaw. In doing so, the 3,000 godly ways were a step closer to perfection. You said that the godly way's great unity has 3 flaws, and the blood essence godly way is one of them. Are the other 2 flaws also godly ways? Zen guessed. The regal jade spirit just smiled. If it were that simple, the godly way's great unity would have been perfected a long time ago. Although I don't know what the other 2 flaws are, they most probably aren't essence powers, or what you'd call godly ways. Zen pursed his lips, realizing his mistake. The members of the regal jade civilization had done everything in their power to try to find the other 2 flaws. How could he have been so bold to think he could figure it out on his own? After a moment of silence, another thought crossed Zen's mind. What kind of other shore token is the civilization artifact? The descending type, the strengthening type, or the mysterious type? Realizing the regal jade spirit's evident confusion, Zen briefly explained the types. Finally, the regal jade spirit replied, the civilization artifact has all the qualities you just listed. Here, I will teach you how to use it. Meanwhile, as Zen and the regal jade spirit talked, Jeffrey was standing on top of a palace, his gaze turned towards the sky. The moment the civilization artifact appeared in Zen's inner world, Jeffrey knew that his father brought back something strange. After the chains disappeared, the huge blood-red Sanskrit word appearing in the sky immediately caught Jeffrey's attention. With curiosity, he studied it, trying to figure out the meaning of this mysterious Sanskrit word. Chapter 2925, The Disintegrated Sanskrit Word. The last time Jeffrey deciphered 2 Sanskrit words of the truth enlightenment, he had suffered a lot. So, he understood not all Sanskrit words could be deciphered easily. However, when he saw this unique blood-red Sanskrit word floating in the sky, he still could not suppress his curiosity. As he was trying to interpret it, the Sanskrit word suddenly began to tremble, and the blood-red energy suddenly dispersed into the air like a vapor. Zen and the regal jade spirit were deep in discussion, so they didn't expect the Sanskrit word to act up like this. The regal jade spirit grunted confusedly. Someone is interpreting this Sanskrit word. Is there a decipherer in your inner world? There were some creatures in the regal jade civilization responsible for interpreting Sanskrit words, called decipherers. In Zen's inner world, the sole person who could decipher Sanskrit words was Jeffrey. Zen scanned his inner world from the skies. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto Jeffrey, who was looking up at the sky with a confused look. It's my son, Zen answered. How can he decipher a Sanskrit word at such a level? The regal jade spirit asked in surprise. Zen already knew how difficult it was to decipher Sanskrit words, but he also knew his son had a knack for it. Even Eastern Emperor Tai found it difficult to decipher the truth enlightenment of the truth of eternal sword intent, but Jeffrey had been able to do it. Has he deciphered it? Zen asked curiously. Minutes earlier, the regal jade spirit had said that it was impossible to decipher the blood-red Sanskrit word. It had been telling Zen that the only thing he needed to do was to fuse with the energy of the blood essence godly way, nothing more. However, much to Zen's surprise, it seemed that Jeffrey could decipher it. Zen waved his hand, summoning a space door. He reached into the space door and gently pulled Jeffrey out. Father, Jeffrey cried in surprise. Did you just decipher that Sanskrit word? Zen pointed at the blood-red energy floating in the sky. Jeffrey nodded sheepishly. I was just curious. His eyes lit up excitedly. It seems to be intelligent, Father. It dispersed while I was deciphering it. Then, can you decipher the Sanskrit word? The voice of the regal jade spirit echoed in the air. What was that sound? Jeffrey's head whipped around in confusion. This is Master Regal Jade, Zen answered. In Jeffrey's eyes, his father was invincible. However, upon hearing the authoritative voice of the regal jade spirit, he sensed it was even more powerful than Zen. Blinking excitedly, he replied, I am confident I can interpret this Sanskrit word, but it disintegrated too quickly. I didn't have enough time. Are you truly sure? The regal jade spirit questioned dubiously. In the past, the Wing King had gone through great lengths to find this Sanskrit word that contained the blood essence power. This blood-red Sanskrit word was quite special. Whenever someone tried to decipher it, the blood essence power would dissipate. After some period of time, it would recover, forming the Sanskrit word once more. At the time, the Wing King believed that there were special meanings in the Sanskrit word. He couldn't interpret it by himself, so he enlisted the help of the best decipherers of the regal Jade civilization. These decipherers were the most outstanding, each of them had their own talent, but none of them succeeded in deciphering the blood-red Sanskrit word. After trying countless times, the Wing King finally gave up and resigned himself to believing that the Sanskrit word was meaningless. Since then, only a few people still insisted on deciphering it, but no one succeeded. This was why, when the regal Jade spirit took out the blood essence power, it told Zen not to pay attention to the Sanskrit word but to focus on the power it contained, as the power was the most important. Now that Jeffrey claimed he could decipher it, naturally the regal Jade spirit was doubtful. "Jeffrey, are you really sure? You have to tell me the truth," Zen said firmly. Jeffrey was a little bit rebellious, but he couldn't do much since Zen had imprisoned him in his inner world. Seeing his own father doubting his abilities, he felt a bit indignant. "There isn't much information recorded in the Sanskrit word. As long as it doesn't disintegrate, I can decipher it," he said, puffing out his chest. Zen exhaled slowly through his nose. He still thought Jeffrey was bragging. After all, the regal Jade spirit had lived as a chaos ancient god. If it claimed that the Sanskrit word was indecipherable, then shouldn't it be? Just as he was about to scold his son, the regal Jade spirit suddenly cut in. "What do you mean there isn't much information recorded in the Sanskrit word?" Startled by the regal Jade spirit's sudden sense of urgency, Jeffrey hesitated slightly. Although the structure of the Sanskrit word is complicated, there isn't much information contained in it, Jeffrey answered firmly. The regal Jade spirit didn't say anything for a moment. It was obvious that Jeffrey had aroused its interest, because the Wing King had said the exact same thing before. The regal Jade spirit had once been the Wing King's right hand. After being unable to decipher the Sanskrit word, the Wing King's expression fell. Under his breath, he had mumbled, "There isn't too much information hidden in this Sanskrit word, but I just can't interpret it." After years of research, the Wing King had come to this conclusion. Zen's son only glanced at the blood-red Sanskrit word for a while, and he arrived at the same conclusion almost instantly. Even the regal Jade spirit, who was wise and experienced, was surprised. In that case, the regal Jade spirit said carefully, "Please try to decipher the Sanskrit word." Zen was surprised when he noticed the change in the tone of the regal Jade spirit. It seemed to believe what Jeffrey was saying. "The Sanskrit word disintegrates so quickly that I don't have time to decipher it," Jeffrey said helplessly. "If you copy it, it will not break apart," the regal Jade spirit responded. Suddenly, Jeffrey's eyes flashed slyly. What will I gain from deciphering this Sanskrit word? It was one of his habits from childhood. Before doing anything, he'd always try to find out what he'd get out of it first. But he never asked for anything extravagant. In the source world, one could earn a lot of money for deciphering some Sanskrit words. If the Sanskrit word was a little more complicated, the price for the deciphering work would be extremely high. Taking the two Sanskrit words of the truth enlightenment as an example, after they were deciphered, the value of their translated version was immeasurable. However, whenever Zen asked Jeffrey for help, he was never rewarded. "What will you gain?" The regal Jade spirit hesitated for a moment, as it thought about it carefully. "If you are able to disciple it, I will accept you as my disciple." There was a great civilization that supported the regal Jade spirit, known as the regal Jade civilization. This civilization was considered one of the strongest and most prosperous among countless civilizations on the other shore. As a result, a lot of special theurgies and methods were born here. Moreover, the regal Jade spirit itself was once a son of truth, otherwise known as a chaos ancient god. This was a splendid opportunity. Zen was secretly proud of his son at merely being offered such a trade. However, to his surprise, Jeffrey's face was full of disdain. "Father, is the regal Jade spirit powerful? How powerful is it, exactly? Is it as powerful as Master Estelle?" Estelle had stayed in the fairy palace for a long time. Jeffrey, having only been exposed to things within Zen's inner world, had thought that Estelle was the most powerful being. Zen gave him a funny expression. Although Estelle was indeed a powerful warrior in the divine land, she was nowhere near as powerful as the regal Jade spirit. Zen patiently explained the strength of the chaos ancient god to his son. Jeffrey's expression changed from disdain to one of delight, while he was listening to Zen with keen interest. After he finally understood the power of a chaos ancient god, he spoke to the regal Jade spirit. "Then, it's settled, I'll decipher the Sanskrit word for you." Chapter 2926, Spokespersons. Jeffrey was greatly interested in the vast source world. Zen had promised him that once he became a consummate true god, he would allow him to leave. The powerful warriors he would encounter in the outside world were unmatched compared to those he met in Zen's inner world. He needed more strength to go further into the source world. His father had told him that the regal jade spirit was one of the strongest warriors in the chaos, piquing his interest. "We have a deal," replied the regal jade spirit. Soon after, the dispersed blood essence power slowly gathered and formed the Sanskrit word once again. Jeffrey wasn't eager to decipher it, he did it after Zen had already copied it on the paper. But something unusual happened. The word formed by the blood essence power dissipated once he began deciphering the copied word on the paper. "What's going on?" Zen asked with furrowed brows. Jeffrey was deciphering the Sanskrit word on paper. Why was the one formed by blood essence power still dissipating? "Quite an interesting reaction," said the regal jade spirit, seemingly unbothered. "No matter when and where you decipher a copy of this word, the blood essence power will dissipate rapidly, even if it's half a chaos away." To decipher it, the regal jade civilization had gone through painstaking efforts. But it was all in vain apart from how they gained a thorough understanding of its nature. Gripping the copy firmly in his hands, Jeffrey levitated, deep in thought. The two Sanskrit words of the truth enlightenment were known to be highly complex, but this one seemed to be the extreme opposite. It was almost too simple. When it came to these words, though, the simpler they were, the more difficult it was to judge and decipher. There were countless possible meanings behind a simple word. For most decipherers, such a situation meant a dead end. But Jeffrey was rather exceptional. After 5 minutes passed, Jeffrey rolled the paper in his hands as his lips curled up into a smile. "Did you pick up any clues?" Zen asked, his brows raised at the other's expression. "Even better, I've deciphered it," he responded proudly. Both Zen and the regal jade spirit were shocked and wide-eyed. "How is that possible?" "Nothing is impossible," Jeffrey said, pursing his lips. "But it records a mere sentence. There is very little information in this word." "What does it mean? What information?" the other two eagerly asked after him. While it was possible that Jeffrey was fooling them, the two still hoped to gain some information, no matter how minute. "The element spirit civilization has committed despicable theft. They stole the sacred fire, making the world grow cold and silent," he read, according to what he deciphered. Even he was confused by it. "What does that mean?" "The element spirit civilization, is that a ruling civilization?" Zen questioned. But civilization carried a broad definition. Several civilizations resided in Zen's inner world. There were even signs of the developing human race forming different civilizations. If one could become the ruling civilization, such a group must be a hegemony in the chaos. Even Zen himself didn't know exactly what the element spirit civilization was. It was less likely that Jeffrey knew of it. Now that the two were certain that Jeffrey wasn't deceiving them, they thought hard about the deciphered sentence. "The element spirit civilization is the second ruling civilization," the regal jade spirit said. "The second, that means it also appeared very early on," Zen said, rather shocked. "The first civilization was the instant civilization. It must have had some strong warriors who then became chaos ancient gods in the second civilization. These two civilizations were closely linked." "That's right. The instant civilization was short in time while the element spirit civilization had no form. In essence, they were both formed by energies that gathered," said the regal jade spirit. "When in the process of growing extremely powerful, some energies produced fire spirits, water spirits, and other creatures of different elements. These creatures had no physical form. Such was what formed the element spirit race in the second chaos. This race stood out among the rest because they had many different kinds of elements. It says that the element spirit race stole the sacred fire, but what is it?" Zen asked again, still confused. "I'm not sure," muttered the regal jade spirit. "It says that they made the world cold and silent. It perhaps refers to the chaos. The sacred fire must be another flaw in the way's blending energy." Zen's eyes lit up at that. "You mean the flaw was taken away by this race?" "Most likely," the regal jade spirit replied. "But what's the situation of the element spirit race now?" Zen wondered, looking concerned. The regal jade spirit only laughed and said, "This race is ranked third on the other shore. It's a powerful and ancient race that consistently dominates the upper stages." "So this civilization is truly very powerful," Zen frowned as he considered it. "If so, doesn't that mean that the other civilizations have no chance to climb up the stages? Let alone on the other shore, even everything in the source world is the result of their deliberate plan. Those powerful races in the source world are supported by the chaos ancient gods, who are supported by the civilizations hiding on the other shore. The top-level masters in the source world serve as mere spokespersons of the civilizations, explained the regal Jade Spirit. Spokespersons of the civilizations. Zen was utterly shocked to hear such a thing. Number 9527 had told him that the Bering race had a chaos ancient god to support them, they wouldn't have risen so fast otherwise. But to think that the chaos ancient gods had relied on the civilizations from the other shore, it was truly inconceivable. Did you really say that the top-level masters in the source world are their spokespersons? Zen asked again in disbelief. Yes, the regal Jade Spirit affirmed. The chaos has experienced many rounds of destruction and rebirth, the powerful civilizations have long since been skilled at the game. As soon as the chaos was born, they began planning. According to what the regal Jade Spirit said, Eastern Emperor Tai also had a civilization behind him for support. And to think that the snake goddess and Fuxi were the same. While Zen was lost in thought, the regal Jade Spirit smiled and said, "Don't forget, you are now the spokesperson of our regal Jade civilization." The regal Jade civilization was once a powerful civilization that ranked among the top 10. But because they were hidden at stage 13, they didn't get much attention. I see, Zen nodded slightly. So, to find the so-called sacred fire, I must find this element spirit civilization. Yes, but you're not strong enough to do so right now. The regal Jade Spirit sighed and continued, even if it was Wing King who led us, it would be impossible for us to wage a war against the element spiritual race. The top 3 civilizations on the other shore are all as solid as rock in their positions. They have advantages, so the other civilizations couldn't possibly contend against them. Chapter 2927, Primitive Land. Zen couldn't help but sigh. After all, he still knew too little about the other shore. In the beginning, he had entered the other shore only to obtain the other shore tokens so that he could gain control of stronger powers. He didn't expect that the forces on the other shore were far more complicated than he had imagined. He was still communicating with the regal Jade Spirit when Jeffrey, who stood beside him, had started to grow impatient. "Hey, you said you would take me as your disciple," Jeffrey reminded the regal Jade Spirit a bit harshly. "Don't be rude, Jeffrey," Zen shushed him. The regal Jade Spirit was known to be quite kind. Not only that, but it always did what it had promised. Buzz. A green light flashed in the civilization artifact, and turned into a green square that was as tall as a person. The whole square looked like a piece of high-quality jade. Crack, 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 crisp crackles filled the air as the jade's surface trembled. Some green-colored debris fell off from it, then the jade finally turned into a middle-aged man who looked like an exquisite sculpture. "This is you." Jeffrey's eyes were as wide as saucers as he gawked at the figure. A smile dawned upon the regal Jade Spirit's lips. He then turned to Zen and said, "Would you mind if I make a body and manifest myself in the human image while I stay in your inner world?" Zen cupped his hands towards the regal Jade Spirit and said, "You are being too polite." "Of course I won't mind." The regal Jade Spirit looked around. When he saw the brown chaotic sea, a trace of doubt appeared on his face. "The sea of this world." His sentence, however, was left unfinished. "What do you want to say?" Zen asked in confusion. The regal Jade Spirit flew down from high in the air and went straight into the chaotic sea. He stretched out his hand and took a handful of the seawater and said, "Is this the seawater transformed from chaotic energy?" "Yes." "What's wrong?" Zen asked curiously. The brown seawater boiled in the hand of the regal Jade Spirit. It wasn't long before it turned into a trace of chaotic energy and dissipated. It made the regal Jade Spirit even more surprised. "How exactly was your inner world formed?" he asked. The reason Zen's inner world acted like such was all because of the primal chaos technique his master Bromley had given him. He had directly replaced the life vitality in his inner world with chaotic energy. "I cultivated a secret technique back then and that's why it has become like this," Zen replied frankly. After all, there was no need to keep it a secret anymore. The regal Jade Spirit's face became even more unreadable. "You cultivated a secret technique. Where did you get it? The evolution in your inner world isn't complete. Why is it in such a state? It's so strange," he trailed off. In reality, Zen didn't have a chance to know where his master had obtained the primal chaos technique. When his mother had later on asked about it, she had reprimanded Bromley for being too crazy to give Zen the incomplete primal chaos technique to cultivate. Despite that, it had done Zen no harm and as a result, it actually wasn't so bad. Besides, Mike and Lorena didn't see anything wrong when they had entered Zen's inner world to check, so they just let the matter go. As for the claim that his inner world was incomplete, Zen had never heard anyone mention such a thing to him. There was a slight hint of confusion in his dark eyes. "What makes you think that my inner world is incomplete?" he asked. Once any world, including the source world, has been formed, the chaotic energy in that world will fade away completely. The chaotic energy is the most basic energy, and it is extremely poisonous to living beings. It is very difficult for creatures to be formed in such an environment, the regal jade spirit said, deep in thought. The chaotic energy would fade away. Zen pondered on the words the regal jade spirit had said. Generally speaking, only holy beings and warriors at the other shore realm could roam through the chaos. On the other hand, there were a large number of low-level creatures in the source world, and chaotic energy had never even existed in it. In Zen's inner world, however, it was different. The chaotic seawater in it was still in a primitive state, but the creatures in his inner world weren't afraid of it at all. In fact, it was in the chaotic sea where the creatures had been born. Of course, Zen knew what the regal jade spirit meant, but he was more confused. What then was the use of having such an inner world? Even until now, he still didn't know where his master was and he couldn't find a way to ask him about it. When the regal jade spirit saw Zen's puzzled expression, he quickly said, I've only seen one possibility that could explain your situation. What's that? Such a situation usually occurred in the early times of the primitive land. I have observed such a phenomenon after I became the Son of Truth, the regal jade spirit answered. His eyes began to glow as he spoke, which meant that the story was a clearly distant memory. The regal jade civilization was the 749th ruling civilization, and the regal jade spirit was the Son of Truth of the 750th civilization. Therefore, he had observed how the 750th civilization came into being. What is the primitive land? Zen asked again. The very initial form of your source world is the primitive land. If let's say the whole chaos is an egg, then the source world is the egg yolk, and the primitive land is what we call it when the egg yolk starts to form at the very beginning. If your inner world is really the primitive land, then it shouldn't be a virtual place inside your body. It's actually a real place in the chaos. Have you noticed it? The regal jade spirit continued. As soon as the regal jade spirit finished speaking, Zen's body suddenly trembled. The borders of his inner world were made up of 1080 Sanskrit words, which circled the range of his inner world. Yet when his inner world had matured, he had once had a faint feeling that his inner world was at a certain place in the chaos. At that time, he was in the divine land and had thought that such a thing was a common phenomenon shared by all the creatures from the source world. Now, it seemed that he was wrong. It seems that I'm right, the regal jade spirit said with a smile. Isn't there only one primitive land? Zen asked. If what the regal jade spirit had said about the chaos being an egg while the source world being its egg yolk was true, then there should only be one primitive land. Dad, haven't you heard of an egg with double yolks? Jeffrey, who had been listening to them silently all this time, chipped in. Zen stared at him. It indeed made sense according to this metaphor, but it was still only a metaphor. Could he take it for real? When a round of chaos comes into being, there might be several or even a dozen primitive lands that are formed where different civilizations start to develop. However, I've never heard of a creature's inner world being a primitive land before, the regal jade spirit said with a shake of his head and smiled. It was a bit hasty to appoint you as the spokesperson of our regal jade civilization and you were even not qualified, but now, things seem to be getting more and more interesting, he continued. The regal jade civilization had been hiding in stage 13 for a long time, and the regal jade spirit also felt that there wasn't much time left. Choosing Zen to be their spokesperson was just a makeshift plan, but as the regal jade spirit got to know more about him, he discovered that Zen was not as simple as he seemed. While Zen discussed things with the regal jade spirit, the divine land on the other side of the chaos had already traveled through the boundless chaos for a long time. The divine land was like a bright gem that traversed through one chaos cloud after another. It was impressive considering that those chaos clouds were unimaginably large, and it usually took several months for the divine land to pass through a chaos cloud at its normal speed. Before Zen left the divine land, he had handed the sun-resisting umbrella over to Mike. However, it was Timotheus who actually controlled which direction the divine land would go. Timotheus stood in the sun, his hands controlling the four rings as his consciousness floated to the outside of the divine land. His eyes paid close attention to the surroundings of the divine land. It was actually boring to control this divine land. There were no sceneries in the boundless chaos, but Timotheus was extremely responsible in doing his job. He hadn't even blinked in the past few months and maintained the same posture all the time. Suddenly, he sensed something strange. What's that? He muttered. His eyes quickly widened when he realized what it was. When the divine land passed through a chaos cloud, a huge tombstone emerged from behind it. The tombstone was as large as the entire divine land. Chapter 2928, The graveyard. The divine land itself was extremely huge and had taken Chiyu a lot of effort and time to build. The tombstone was about the same size as the divine land, a fact that shocked Timotheus greatly. He thought back to a rumor. The chaos was vast and empty, but many secrets and forbidden areas lay hidden within it. Those who entered dangerous sections of it, like the ruined graveyard, had no chance of returning. Rumor had it that if you saw a huge tombstone, it meant that you had stepped into the ruined graveyard and there would be no way back. Timotheus never believed in rumors like this. He only believed what he saw. But now that he was looking at this huge tombstone, he was finally on high alert. He waved his hands around, causing his body to spin 180 degrees to his right. The fast-moving divine land turned abruptly and sped on towards the other side. This time, Timotheus did not drive the ship into the chaos cloud because he couldn't see properly up there. He had to make sure he stayed away from the tombstone. He had controlled the divine land to fly for a while along the cloud when the sight of the tombstone looming in front of him again caused him to pale. Dang it! A sense of foreboding rose from the bottom of his heart. Once he had accepted the captain's position, the entirety of the divine land had come under his control. He would be in big trouble if he entered the ruined graveyard. How would he ever face Grand Chieftain Chiyu if the divine land were to fall to ruin? Timotheus decided to change direction. He drove the ship to fly straight up. But it was not long before the same thing happened. The huge tombstone was waiting for him. "We can't go out," Timotheus muttered, gritting his teeth. He drove the ship in the direction of the tombstone. He passed by it, and the moment he did, he saw another huge tombstone up ahead. These tombstones, each of which was the same size as the divine land, were everywhere. But they looked dilapidated, as if they had been here in storage for tens of millions of years and had already turned into ruins. So the rumor about the ruined graveyard is true. Timotheus had flown for a while before he realized that he couldn't go on anymore. So he decided to discuss the situation with his group. He retreated from the rings, took the sun-resisting umbrella, and emerged from the sun. He then used the grand teleportation to head for the Time Sea. The largest floating island in the center of the Time Sea was magnificently scenic, but despite all of it, the atmosphere in the hall seemed stiff and solemn. Many holy beings were gathered in the hall where Lorena sat on the throne, Rosie standing behind her. Mike stood in the middle of the hall, his brows furrowed as he asked Timotheus, "Is it true?" Timotheus nodded and said, "That place is quite famous in the source world. Almost everyone who has explored the chaos has heard about it. It is not just a baseless rumor. Then the divine land will be ruined, won't it? It is the only place where we can live in. What makes that place so dangerous?" The holy beings were whispering among themselves. Their worry stemmed from the fact that all of them were in the same boat. All of them lived here and shared lives and deaths with each other. "Timotheus," Rosie called out loudly over the whispers. "You said that whoever sees the tombstones can't find a way out. Then who gave the ruined graveyard its name? The person who named it must have been there. How did this person return to the source world?" Timotheus folded his hands and bowed to Rosie. "That's why I don't believe in the rumor. Maybe we can find the way out. Maybe we can go back. But you will have to make a decision for us." Timotheus was the smartest, most far-sighted person in the divine land. Whenever he didn't know what to do, he asked Lorena and her sister for their opinion. After all, they were the direct descendants of the Nine Li race. Lorena and Mike looked at each other. Mike then suggested, "How about we send some people out of the divine land to investigate it?" The chaotic energy was terrifying, but there were many people, including the holy beings and the masters at the other shore realm who could travel through it. "That's a good idea," Ramsey agreed. Timotheus nodded. "I'll stop the divine land right away and then go make an investigation." "Timotheus, you should stay in the divine land. We'll take responsibility for the exploration," said Mike. Given that the divine land was still weak when compared to the strong beings of the chaos, Mike's suggestion was reasonable. They couldn't afford to put Timotheus in danger. But Lorena hesitated. She didn't want to risk Mike's life. Mike laughed and said, "It's not a big deal for us to die outside since we have rebirth lands of our own. I will lead a team for the exploration." Lorena was aware that the rebirth land wasn't the best option. But she had no choice but to agree in front of so many people. It was not long before many holy beings, including Mike, Holy Jay, Estelle, and Sword Chen, went out of the divine land. Ramsey was the only 9 Li guard who went with them. They approached the outer wall of the divine land and stood at it, taking in the horizon. Their eyes widened as they saw the huge tombstone. "The tombstone is so huge. I wonder who is buried underneath," a holy being exclaimed. "There is no tomb, just the tombstone. This place is strange, said Sword Chen. Ramsey stared at the tombstone before cautiously saying, there are many inconceivable things in the chaos. We must be more careful. Everyone, follow me, said Mike as he leapt up and traveled through the chaos. The others followed him closely. Though it seemed the divine land stopped not far from a tombstone, it would still take a lot of time for a holy being to reach it. A day and a half later, the holy beings finally arrived at the tombstone. The dark tombstone floated in the air. This lonely, lifeless object emitted a strange aura, and its huge shape exerted an inexplicably great pressure on the holy beings. One side of the tombstone was covered with cracks, each as deep as an abyss. One of the holy beings approached a crack. The moment he got close, a huge tongue stretched out from within the crack. A number of hooks jutted out of the surface of the tongue, each glinting dangerously. The tongue caught the holy being, the hooks piercing his body as it sucked him into the crack of the tombstone. It was at this moment that a sudden vibration rocked the divine land. A universe had just collapsed. Chapter 2929, The Men in Carapace Armor. It had never occurred to Mike and the others that such a vicious thing was hiding in the cracks of the tombstone. They turned pale with fright and stepped back. The holy being of the Fang clan has been sucked into the crack. I'm afraid he's been killed. Don't get too close to the tombstone, everyone. The holy beings reminded one another. The holy beings took solace in the thought that death was not the end for them. They could be resurrected. Just then, a rune emerged beside Ramsey. He gently pressed it with his finger. Timotheus, voice rang out. The universe of the holy being of the Fang clan has collapsed. The group's noise died down immediately as they registered the news in shock. How come his universe collapsed? Then is he dead for good? How could that be? The holy beings could not believe what had happened. Their universes were their talismans. How could a talisman just be obliterated like that? The ruin graveyard has its own rules. And it's not so difficult to cut off the connection to the rebirth land. Be careful, everyone, Ramsey reminded. Most of the true masters in the source world would not rely on their rebirth lands. On the one hand, the rebirth land was a place of restraint. On the other hand, it was not so safe. As the holy beings fretted, a head appeared from a dark crack. It was a black toad over 200 feet long. A ghastly face was embedded on its back. What kind of monster is this? What a disgusting face. So the holy being of the Fang clan was swallowed by this monster. The holy beings had seen many abominable creatures in the divine land. When the toad showed itself, everyone was somehow relieved because it didn't seem as bad. The strength of so many holy beings couldn't be underestimated. Moreover, Ramsey was a powerhouse at the other shore realm. They were confident they could deal with the toad. But after the first toad appeared, many other toads appeared from the cracks. The tombstone was as large as the divine land. The cracks seemed negligible on the tombstone, but in fact, each of them was several thousand feet wide. The space inside was unimaginably large. The toads that had come out from these cracks stood densely in a row, sending out a cold aura. Their cheeks were bulging in unison. The ruined graveyard is the toads' nest. The toads aren't alone here, are they? Quote, any of the toads could swallow the holy beings effortlessly. And there were over 1,000 toads in front of them. If the creatures pounced on them, how would they be able to fend them all off? We need to get out of here, Mike hissed urgently. The other holy beings had long wanted to leave. They were only too happy to comply with Mike's orders. But just as they were set to retreat, they heard a strange flute-like sound. The ghastly faces on all the toads' backs opened their mouths and emitted shrill cries at the same time. As one, the toads jumped up and rushed toward the holy beings. At this sight, the holy beings' blood ran cold. Use the grand teleportation. Let's go. Buzz. Every time the space waves formed, they disappeared instantly. Master, we can't use the grand teleportation in this place, said Sword Chen, gritting his teeth. He had a strong will since he had stayed in the Abyss Demon region for so long, but even he was unnerved to see the toads charging at them. The holy beings tried again but failed, just like Sword Chen. The space channel could not be opened. In panic, they could only rapidly fall back. However, the black toads moved faster than them. They moved in the empty space without making a sound. In the blink of an eye, many toads had circled the holy beings, surrounding them completely. Compared to the panic-stricken holy beings, Ramsey was much calmer. His fingers flipped in the air, and pale yellow runes surfaced in front of him. The runes formed circles of light and spread out, turning into a large array. The array was surging and sparking with extremely terrifying power. He directed the holy beings, everyone, come over here. In this group, no one was more powerful than Ramsey. The holy beings were confident in his strength. They scrambled into the array formed by the runes, grasping eagerly at what they knew was a last life-saving straw. Don't panic. These toads must be under the control of some other mastermind, Ramsay deduced. After all, he was much more knowledgeable than the holy beings. The toads obviously weren't sentient. They only attacked, by instinct, the creatures that dared to approach the cracks. However, when the strange flute sounded, all the toads moved in an organized manner. Obviously, they were being manipulated by someone. The most important thing now was that these toads appeared to be obeying some silent order and weren't attacking. The flute sound was getting louder and louder. The screams of the faces on the toads were likewise growing more intense. Soon, the holy beings saw a dozen black dots flying out from behind the tombstone. As the dots approached, the group mistook them for insects. Only when they came nearer did the holy beings see clearly what they were. They were not bugs, but human beings. They were all wearing masks made of insect heads and shell armor on their bodies, making them look like actual bugs from a distance. There are actually human beings in the ruin graveyard. Even Ramsay, who was usually composed, was surprised. The ruin graveyard was famous for its dangers, and various vicious races were lurking within it. Who would have thought that humans would be among them? The men in carapace armor approached, crossed the toads, encirclement, and put the flutes down. "You, follow us," their leader barked out. "Where are we going?" asked Mike. "You don't have the right to ask questions," the leader replied stiffly. He put his flute to his mouth and started playing a gentle tune. The toads started to stir. It was clear if the armored men kept playing their flutes, the toads would pounce on the group without hesitation. These men disregarded Ramsay's array completely. The holy beings knew then it wouldn't protect them. "Do as they say and don't resist," Mike said to the holy beings. Any wrong move and they would get killed. Now that Mike had given the order, the other holy beings decided to cooperate. The armored men led the way, while the toads surrounded the holy beings layer by layer. Together, they flew toward the cracks in the upper right corner of the tombstone. In the divine land, Timotheus returned to the internal region of the sun and tied the 4 rings to his body. He had the sharpest and broadest vision in the entire divine land. He had thus witnessed the events at the tombstone. Chapter 2930, An Old Friend. With the toads as their escorts, Mike and the other holy beings entered a great crack in the tombstone. Inside was a whole other world, dark and wet. Big black toads, 1,000-foot wide beetles, and 10,000-foot long centipedes crawled along the rock walls. The holy beings' faces fell at the sight of their environment. What was that place? The men in carapace armor said nothing and merely took the lead. After the holy beings entered the crack, their escorts scattered and returned to their respective lairs. They did not worry about the holy beings escaping, anyway. "Mike, what is this place? I'm afraid that we're done for. We can't get out of this place." Now, even the holy beings were afraid of death. When Zen ruled the divine land, some of the holy beings died, and some were reincarnated. A new era had begun in the divine land, its rules were more just. The descendants of the large clans all began developing, growing more and more powerful. The last thing they wanted was to perish in this time of the new era. If they really wanted to kill us, they could have done it outside the tombstone. Why did they bother taking us here? Mike pondered calmly. He made sense, but that didn't alleviate their uneasiness in the grim environment. After flying over 100 miles in the crack, they found a wide jungle. The trees there stood over 10,000 feet high, which made some of them think that they had arrived at the swirl forest. The scenery was similar, but it somehow seemed much darker and more mysterious. In the depths of the jungle, Mike and the rest eventually found some normal buildings on a great tree. When they entered a building, those dressed in carapace armor asked them to wait there. After about 5 minutes, a man stepped into the building. Everyone, including Ramsay who had already reached the other shore, felt the pressure from the man's arrival. How powerful! I'm afraid he has already reached the chaotic source realm, Ramsay thought to himself. In the face of such a strong master, Ramsay knew that even if he went all out, he would be no match for his opponent. The holy beings couldn't even dream of standing against the man. The strange man walked briskly toward them and suddenly pulled on Mike's and Holy Jay's arms. He greeted them excitedly. "Mike, Jay, how have you been?" The two were stunned. It was their first time visiting the ruin graveyard, so everyone felt grim and anxious. They then all got surprised when the newcomer suddenly greeted Mike and Holy Jay in such a friendly manner. The man was wearing a mask made of the head of an insect. Thus no one could even see his face clearly. "It's been years since we last saw each other. You can't even recognize my voice now," said the man as he pulled off the mask, revealing a handsome face of an elegant, middle-aged man. Bromley. It's Bromley. Holy Bromley. It really is him. Before Mike and Holy J could even react, the other holy beings recognized the man. Bromley came from one of the most powerful clans, after all. Even after he had been off the grid for years, the GU clan's floating island still ranked among the finest. He was indeed extraordinary, leaving a great impression on the other holy beings. Some of them had once followed and supported Nicholas. Back then, they held grudges against Bromley. But these holy beings had already been punished by Zen. In the divine land, they were as docile as sheep. Now, they were extremely welcoming, as if Bromley was a long-lost brother. For another moment, Mike and Holy J stared at Bromley. They had been separated for far too long. In that time, Bromley's cultivation base had greatly increased. There was a dramatic change in his aura, and at that moment, they almost didn't dare believe that the man standing before them was Bromley. Once that moment passed, however, they enveloped him in a tight embrace. If it weren't for your universe, we would have thought you were already dead, Mike said. A person's rebirth land could tell others of their general condition. In the source world, Zen could roughly point out the evil god's location through the rebirth land. While it was an obscure means of locating, it gave him the right direction to follow. Before Zen left the divine land, Mike had asked him to investigate Bromley's whereabouts. But Bromley's universe gave him no clues. Lorena and Timotheus had explained that certain places existed to render the rebirth land ineffective. For instance, in the Chaos Ancient God's prison, the rebirth land was useless for finding one's location. If Bromley was in such a place, no one would have found him through the rebirth land. The ruin graveyard was such a place. The holy being of the Fang clan perished here. I ended up in the ruin graveyard by accident. I'm always worried about you, Mike, but I just couldn't leave this place. I'm ashamed, Bromley said, lowering his head. Back then, there was no point for Bromley to stay in the divine land if he couldn't fight Nicholas. If he chose to battle him, the GU clan would have probably ended up the way the Luo clan did. Leaving was the best thing he could do at the time. You're not in the divine land, but you left a fairy palace there, which helped me a lot, Mike said with a smile. In Mike's universe, Zen had been cultivated, and won the war against Murphy's universe. It all had something to do with the fairy palace Bromley had left behind. After the holy beings settled down, they listened as the newly reunited friends chatted away. As they did, they heard of the process of Zen's growth, how he had defeated the Murphy universe in the war, and how he had grown increasingly powerful in the divine land. For as long as they knew him, the holy beings merely assumed that Zen just had too much luck. Never did they expect to find so many twists and turns in his story. They just grew more in awe of him as they heard his story. Admiration flashed in Bromley's eyes as he listened to Mike's narration. Shaking his head, he said, "Well, according to you, I'm not the one who makes the biggest contribution. As it turns out, it's your good son. He's also your good disciple, haha." Mike burst out in laughter. Although Bromley was Zen's master, they had never met personally. It was a strange thing. After briefly telling Bromley what had happened in the divine land, Mike asked, "Do you know what kind of place the ruin graveyard is? Do you really think we have no way of leaving this place?" Bromley's eyes gleamed with a sense of serenity as he said, "The ruin graveyard is extremely dangerous in the eyes of outsiders. It's another primitive land of chaos, but it's not as terrible as you probably think. There's a way to leave, but now's not the right time." "I'd like to hear more," Mike urged, cupping his hands. The holy beings left the divine land just to explore the ruin graveyard. It was just their luck to have bumped into Bromley there. And so Bromley told the holy beings of what he knew in great detail. Chapter 2931, The Return of the Master. Only one primitive land was usually formed in each round of chaos. Each round of chaos had only one source world in the early stages. But as the other shore was created, more and more races entered it before the chaos could be destroyed. As the gathered powers on the other shore became more and more complicated, so did the chaos. The chaos often had several primitive lands in the later stages. The source world and the ruin graveyard were among these primitive lands. Only, the ruin graveyard was far smaller in size when compared with the huge source world. All the tombstones that Mike and the others had come across had been as large as the divine land. In all, there were a total of 87 tombstones of this size in the ruin graveyard. Therefore, the ruin graveyard had already been large enough in the eyes of those from the divine land. These 87 tombstones were home to different races, among which humans had the largest influence. At Bromley's explanation, one of the holy beings remarked proudly, humans are the spirit of all gods. It's no surprise that they are the strongest. Chiyu, himself a human, had created the divine land. All other creatures within it, whether intelligent or not, were inferior to humans. These holy beings had never left the divine land, which was why they were under the impression that this was the case everywhere. Bromley shook his head in disagreement at the holy being's words. No, it's not like that. Ramsay nodded and said, humans aren't top forces in the source world, but they have improved a lot these past few years. Some races are born strong, and humans aren't as powerful as them. Bromley looked carefully at Ramsay and then asked, are you from the source world? Yes, I am, Ramsay replied, folding his hands and bowing to Bromley. Ramsay is a 9 guard. The divine land can be safe thanks to them, Mike said as way of introducing him to Bromley. Ramsay and Bromley nodded to each other. Ramsay then asked, who created this primitive land? Another force of the human race, Bromley replied. What? Ramsay was surprised at this answer. He stiffened, his renewed vigilance visible in his stance. These holy beings were born in the divine land but they couldn't claim to be descendants of the 9 race. Things would become complicated if the human force that Bromley had mentioned turned out to be the Bearing race or the divine farmer race. As far as I know, there are only 4 orthodox human forces in the chaos. The 9 race, the Oneness Sky Palace, the Bearing race, and the divine farmer race. Which one of them created the ruin graveyard? Ramsay asked. Bromley shook his head, an unfathomable smile on his lips, and replied, none of them. You may have misunderstood something. The race that could obtain a primitive land would not be born in this chaos. Ramsay's eyes widened. Do you mean a civilization on the other shore? They are humans, he asked. Ramsay had heard about the chaos ancient gods and the civilizations on the other shore from Timotheus. He didn't know much about them, but given the information he learned, he could roughly guess it. But Mike and other holy beings were confused. After Zen had left the divine land, the holy beings there had the opportunity to break through and enter the other shore realm. They were all cultivating the truth of godly way. But only Joy and Estelle had succeeded in entering the sea of truth while the other holy beings were still painstakingly chanting the truth of godly way. It was probably because of their bad compatibility with the truth of godly way that they were making such slow progress. Yes, Bromley nodded cautiously. This particular human force used to be splendid. It was once the ruling civilization of the 77th chaos. It is a powerful civilization even on the other shore. Bromley's amazing feat in cultivation in the ruin graveyard was attributed to his extraordinary talent and the preferential treatment that the human race in the ruin graveyard had given him. After all, they were all human. The other holy beings drew a collective sigh of relief at this piece of information. They had thought that it would be a disaster for the divine land to sink into the ruin graveyard. But it no longer seemed to be a problem. What will they do to the divine land? Mike asked, putting everyone's concerns into words. Bromley thought for a while before answering. They have been looking for their spokespersons among the 87 tombstones. And now that the divine land is here, even if by mistake, they will probably include it in their searches. Spokespersons. Holy J looked confused. He knew little about this. Bromley nodded. Sooner or later, there will be a fierce battle in the chaos. They need to first choose a few spokespersons from among the humans. And the divine land has a large number of humans, so it would prove to have some great choices if it were to join in the selection. The holy beings looked confused at his explanation. There are many humans in the divine land but they are at a low cultivation level. Can they be selected? One of them asked. If we do join the selection, would the humans in this graveyard also support us? Once Zen had left, a crazy rush had erupted within the divine land to comprehend the truth of godly way. Many consummate true gods, demi-holy beings, and holy beings were struggling to comprehend the truth of godly way. But it was too difficult for anybody to comprehend it easily. They couldn't even step into the threshold without a good compatibility with it. But it would be of great help if they could get the support from the ruin graveyard. That was what the great clans in the divine land had long desired. These clans didn't care where the divine land was going. They only wanted it to remain immortal. Bromley smiled faintly. Of course they will, I can assure you of this. Now that Bromley was an important figure in the ruin graveyard, he could easily provide them with the cultivation resources that they needed. The discussion regarding the current situation of the divine land went on for a while before Bromley asked Mike, how is Estelle? Has she come out of the fairy palace? She had been locked in the fairy palace for a long time because of her extra strong personality. Bromley had had no choice in the past but he knew he still cared about her. When I went to the soul wilderness and begged her to help me, she asked me to find you. And I think I've fulfilled my promise now. I made it, Holy J said, a meaningful smile on his face. Bromley's eyes lit up at Holy J's words. I'll go back to the divine land with you, he said excitedly. He led the way and the other holy beings followed close behind. They emerged from the crack and headed straight for the divine land. Bromley was born in the divine land, so he wouldn't be blocked by the divine land's heavenly mirror shield. The moment he entered the divine land, he activated his grand teleportation and rushed to the floating islands above the time sea. It looked like a significant change had taken place on the floating islands. Only a few floating islands of great clans like the Gu clan and the Luo clan remained above the time sea. The huge central floating island stood still. When the divine land had accidentally entered the ruin graveyard, all the warriors of the divine land had been utterly shocked. They were waiting nervously for latest news on the central floating island. Among them were Harold, Hallett, Augustus and Estelle. One universe of the divine land had collapsed not long after the holy beings had left. It was proof that the ruin graveyard was evil. As these warriors waited, a middle-aged man appeared in the sky above the central floating island. Hallett and Augustus were dumbfounded when they saw who he was. Chapter 2932, Asking for a Meeting. As he entered the divine land, Bromley had swiftly removed his carapace armor off his body, and sported a classic green robe. This robe was his signature look, something that he wore very often in the past. Bromley was always regarded as handsome, most especially when he was young. Now that he had improved his cultivation base greatly, he was even more attractive. The strong aura carried him with elegance everywhere he went. Even Mike and Holy J were hardly able to recognize him at first glance, not to mention Hallett and Augustus. He looks so familiar. Who might this be? Augustus wondered as his eyes grew wide. It's Master, Hallett responded. Though he was 100% sure that it was Bromley, neither of them dared to approach him. The strongest warriors they had ever met in their lives were Timotheus and Emily. They had great energies and cultivation bases, making it so intimidating to merely look at them. But Bromley's aura was even stronger than that of them. Everyone was aware that the limit of cultivation in the divine land was the consummation of true God realm. It was extremely difficult to become a holy being, much more to reach the other shore realm. So far, there hadn't been any holy being who had broken through. Bromley's cultivation base had improved so much that he was much more powerful than the holy beings of the divine land. Eventually, Bromley found himself landing on the floating island and gazed at his two disciples. He smiled gently as he acknowledged them, Hallett, Augustus. The two looked at each other in relief, finally sure that this powerful man was indeed their master. Master. In his excitement, Augustus rushed towards Bromley and fell to his knees. Hallett, on the other hand, tried to keep his calm. He walked solemnly towards his master and knelt down right beside Augustus. It is holy Bromley. It is indeed Bromley. It seems that his training has done him well. He looks so powerful. People were murmuring, right as Bromley's identity was confirmed. All were full of shock and excitement. Rise, Bromley said with a smile, holding out his hand towards Hallett and Augustus to help them up. Master, we have missed you. We've fulfilled all the tasks you assigned to us. Augustus stood up, talking with passion to his master. Do us a favor and please stop speaking, Hallett blurted out. He was always fed up with Augustus' verbose expressions. I haven't seen him in years. Augustus said, just let me have my moment. His face was flustered and annoyed. These two bickering before him was not a surprise to Bromley. It doesn't matter, he said with a smile. Augustus is always a chatterbox. I don't mind. Bromley took the time to take a look at the crowd. He caught a glance from Estelle, who stood out among most. Estelle's radiant eyes were filled with all sorts of emotions. Love, happiness, confusion, and even resentment. It seemed like everything she had to say was said through her eyes. When the two's eyes finally met, Estelle turned around and walked swiftly away from the crowd. Seeing her walk away, Bromley jerked forward and followed behind her. He gripped her wrist and tried to pull her in for a hug, but just as his fingertips touched her, she spun around with a scepter in her hand. Buzz. As this scepter trembled with power, it seemed as if a portion of the divine land's power was being used by Estelle alone. Silence. Before, when Estelle launched the power of the scepter of God's silence, her target was the entirety of the divine land. This was different, because now, her target was only Bromley. The crowds flocked and gasped at the sight of this. Who knew what was going to happen? Though Bromley proved to be extraordinarily strong, all the power within him was paralyzed by the scepter of God's silence. Bang! In one swift movement, Estelle swung the scepter and hit Bromley right in the chest. Her figure suddenly altered and began to look faded to the naked eye. Because she was continuously hitting Bromley so quickly, no one could even see her. Each strike she made was fatal. Hallett, she just... Look. Augustus was at a loss for words. Don't meddle, Hallett replied. He knew Bromley could defend himself. The two knew that Bromley's cultivation base was a lot more than anyone could imagine. This meant that no matter what Estelle did, she could not injure him easily. However, Estelle had used all her strength. Even though Hallett seemed calm, hearing the sound of Estelle's hits made his eyes tremble. What if his master was hurt? Or worse, what if he had died? On another note, Mike and Holy J could not stand to watch Estelle do such horrible things. They knew that even if Bromley had hurt Estelle before, they couldn't let her kill him. That was not the way to get revenge. Enough, Mike declared. However, as if she heard nothing, Estelle kept charging towards Bromley with the hope to kill him. But before Mike and Holy J could intercede, Bromley, who was beaten to the ground, looked at them with piercing eyes. He winked at them, and then his lip curled up into a small yet noticeable smile. Both of them were stunned. Did you just see that? Mike turned to Holy J. Apparently, Bromley was playing defenseless. If anyone had been hit by Estelle in the same way, they would have died. But Bromley was stronger than what he was showing everyone, and he knew it all along. He took every hit and every blow that came his way. Even when the power of the scepter of God's silence had gone, he refused to fight back. It was not until Estelle exhausted herself that Bromley approached her and opened his arms. Without any hesitation, she threw herself into his embrace and began to sob endlessly. Bromley thought it was inappropriate to comfort Estelle before the crowds of people, so he turned towards the crowd. We need to go, he said. He lifted a hand and gently moved away Estelle alongside him. Master is so powerful, look at that, she beat him up for so long and it's like nothing happened. Augustus exulted proudly. He figured this was something he could brag about for a very long time, especially because he'd seen it happen. 4 hours had passed and Bromley, together with Estelle, had returned safely to the floating island. The travel allowed Estelle to regain her composure and elegance, so as they arrived, she had only a wide smile across her beautiful face. Not long after the holy beings returned, Timotheus immediately rushed over to ask Ramsay about the ruined graveyard. The future of the divine land had to be discussed in great detail. They had to come to a decision that everyone was on board with. After Zen had successfully merged with the other shore token, the regal jade spirit successfully remained in his inner world. Jeffrey eventually became the regal jade spirit's disciple, and Zen specially created a space for them. Only Jeffrey and the regal jade spirit could enter that place, so that no one could disturb them. After coming out of the inner world, Athamar waited at the courtyard for what seemed like forever. Tension and worry filled Athamar and the others when Zen was trapped on the other shore, and they could only wait for his return. I apologize for causing so much worry while I remained on the other shore, Zen said solemnly to Athamar, cupping his hands towards him. His decision to enter the dark region with Dorothy had been made hastily. He hadn't discussed it with anyone, so it caused much anxiousness among the group. In fact, Athamar had heard about the situation from Flamen. He spoke, the other shore is full of risks and dangers. I can't believe you entered the dark region and got out, but I am glad that you are safe. You are one lucky mongrel. Thank you for praising me, Zen said with a laugh. Athamar rolled his eyes at Zen. I am not praising you. Not at all, he spoke with a sudden seriousness. You are indeed lucky. If not, you would be dead. Once you enter the desire world, please talk to us before making any decisions. After all, we are quite experienced with things like these. I'll make sure to keep that in mind, responded Zen. He knew that Athamar was right, and that he should probably not cause too much trouble anymore. Anyway, there is something else I wanted to talk to you about, Athamar uttered, bringing back his serious expression. What's the matter? Zen asked. A man named Leopold is looking for you, replied Athamar. If one was only another shore realm warrior, it was impossible for them to come into contact with someone like Athamar when they arrived at the Oneness Sky Palace. However, this time, Leopold came with some other people. Chapter 2933, Ambrose Lee. Leopold came back to the Source World for 2 reasons. One was to escort Zen, and the other was to look for the members of the 9 Lee race. In fact, Timotheus didn't give Leopold anything specific to do. They had been away from the Source World for too long. After suffering bitterly at the bottom of chaos, they only wanted a peaceful life. If Leopold was willing to follow Emily to the Pear Hill, he could happily spend the rest of his life with the Snake Goddess race. But he didn't do that. Instead he went to the Pearl Islet. He was trying to find signs the Nine Li race left. His hard work paid off. He found some leads. He followed the trail of clues and actually found the last surviving members of the Nine Li race. Zen's face changed at the mention of Leopold. He asked, "Master Athamar, where is Leopold?" Sensing Zen's eagerness, Athamar smiled and simply replied, "Follow me." Zen walked up to Athamar's huge sword and flew away from the Flow Sword sect. They soared over Oneness Mountain, flew to the northern slope, and finally landed. His landing point was the splendid palace, where the people of the Oneness Mountain received their distinguished guests. Zen hurried into the splendid palace and saw more than 10 people sitting inside, and Leopold was among them. Leopold. Zen. Leopold traveled to the Source World with Emily. After he was separated from Zen, he had lost all hope. His expression was one of surprised delight as he saw Zen again. At first, he didn't know where Zen was. Yan talked to the people of Pear Hill and organized a search party to look for Zen. That was when he discovered the young man was in the Oneness Sky Palace. The Oneness Sky Palace was an orthodox human force. If Zen could get his foot in the door, he might be able to turn them into powerful allies. After finding the remnants of the Nine Li race, Leopold told Ambrose Li about Zen. But they couldn't find a good time to go to the Oneness Sky Palace. After hearing of what had happened in the Grand Sky Temple, they finally decided to risk a journey to the Oneness Sky Palace. "It hasn't been that long since we last saw each other, but your cultivation base has reached the 13th stage of the Other Shore realm. I'm jealous of what you've accomplished," said Leopold, looking Zen up and down in surprise. Zen had just made it to the Sea of Truth before he first came to the Source World. At that time, his strength and cultivation were far weaker than Leopold's. But now he was much stronger than his friend. "I'm flattered. I was lucky," Zen replied modestly. "Come, let's say hi to the chieftain. I'll introduce you," Leopold said as he pulled Zen to the rear. Behind them stood a burly old man. The old man had a poor complexion. His aura seemed restrained, and he was no longer as strong as he had once been. However, his big eyes shone brightly. Anyone would be intimidated if they had to look him in the eye. The chieftain. Zen was confused. According to his information, Chiyu was the only chieftain of the Nine Li race. Leopold said, "The Nine Li race is divided into 9 tribes. Besides the Grand Chieftain, there are 8 others. They're the Grand Chieftain's brothers. This is your grandpa Ambrose." Chiyu was the Grand Chieftain, followed by Harvey, Ambrose and the others. Ambrose's eyes had been fixed on Zen ever since he had entered the splendid palace. After Chiyu was defeated, there was no chance for him to reclaim their power. The Divine Land was just a place that Chiyu built to continue the Nine Li race. When the chaos was destroyed, the Divine Land would also be gone. The Nine Li race would then disappear forever, only remembered in the annals of history. Ambrose would never have imagined a descendant of the Nine Li race would return to the Source World from the Divine Land. Zen addressed the old man, "Grandpa Ambrose." Athamar knew who Zen was, and Leopold was no outsider. Zen wasn't going to hide his identity from these people. Lorena was just a little girl when she left. Now, her son is grown up, said Ambrose with a gratified look. Zen nodded and said, "My mother lives in the Divine Land now. She misses you too. Let me introduce you. This is my grandson, Hutton, and my granddaughter, Sally. Have you met them before?" A man and a woman had been flanking Ambrose. Now they stepped forward. The man was dressed in a suit made of golden silk, and his eyes were as sharp as a knife. The woman wore a silk dress, and was petite and lovely. When she smiled, 2 sweet dimples appeared, which made her very approachable. Ambrose had his own reasons for introducing Sally and Hutton. The remnants of the Nine Li race knew Zen's story. Leopold filled them in. They even knew that he was in the Oneness Sky Palace, but he had never been here before. At that time, Zen's strength was too low. If he had an outstanding talent, it would be better for him to stay in the Oneness Sky Palace to further develop his talents. After all, the Nine Li race was too weak to cultivate him. However, the information that Hutton and his group brought back from the dark region made Ambrose restless. Hutton told Ambrose that when he explored the Grand Sky Temple in the dark region, he met a corporeal body that had the blood of the Nine Li race, and was related to Oneness Sky Palace. This information, together with the news that Leopold brought to Ambrose, suggested that the corporeal body was none other than Zen. Ambrose took a big risk leaving in order to verify it. Zen glanced at Sally. "Yes, we've met. We explored the dark region together. Hard to forget when we almost died." His voice was deeper than usual. "You're Thad." Sally had been quietly observing Zen. She had never seen his real face before, and his voice was not as deep as Thad's, so she wasn't sure whether this man really was him. After she heard Zen's voice, she was 100% sure, and a bright smile appeared on her face. I asked you to find me, but I didn't expect it would be so soon, Zen said with a smile. You're not outsiders. You don't have to call me Thad. My name is Zen. Hutton bowed to Zen. After we said goodbye in the dark region, I thought we'd never see you again. But you left the other shore safely. I am glad to see you here. Sally and Hutton were very interested in what happened to Zen after they parted. Zen couldn't tell them much. His experiences involved Elvenia and the purified being, and those were secrets of the Oneness Sky Palace. This reunion proved what the last members of the Nine Li race had theorized. Thad was Zen, and Zen was from the Divine Land. And Zen had his questions answered. He knew what was going on with the Nine Li race. Only Ambrose stayed with the Nine Li race. The other chieftains had been dead or missing. To complicate matters further, the Bering race had been secretly hunting down the remnants of the Nine Li race. Any descendants were killed on the spot, so every time the Nine Li people ventured forth, they were putting their lives at risk. When he heard what the Bering race had done, Zen furrowed his eyebrows. He shouldn't have been merciful to them. At last, Ambrose suddenly asked, "Are you willing to live among the Nine Li race?" Chapter 2934, Promise. A knowing look flashed across Zen's eyes. Ambrose's request did not come as a surprise to him. After all, he had brought a massive amount of divine crystals from the Divine Land with him, which were originally resources that belonged to the Nine Li race. Most importantly, Chiyu had entrusted Zen with some arrangements, although it was number 9527 who received the task. The remaining members of the Nine Li race had lost all hope, but that changed when Zen arrived. Meanwhile, Athamar's eyes gleamed and his face became unreadable. To be honest, the Oneness Sky Palace didn't invest many resources in Zen's cultivation. Zen was able to climb up the mountain in the Oneness Sky Palace because of his own efforts. In addition, he brought many benefits to the palace. If Zen ever chose to leave, Athamar knew that he had no reason to stop him. So before Zen could speak, he quickly cupped his hands towards Ambrose and said, "Master Ambrose, may I say something?" Ambrose glanced at him and answered, "Please, go ahead." Back then, Ambrose was a hero of indomitable spirit in the Source world. He enjoyed a status that was equal to those of the heads of the 7 mountains of the Oneness Sky Palace. At that time, Athamar was much inferior to him. The times, however, had changed. The Nine Li race had declined and was long past their prime. Moreover, both Ambrose's body and soul had been badly damaged, and he hadn't been able to recover since. He was no longer as strong as he used to be. Zen has made rapid progress ever since he joined the Oneness Sky Palace. I have heard from him many times about his determination and eagerness to rebuild the Nine Li race. The Nine Li race is truly lucky to have such a descendant. I have no doubt that he will be a man of great power in the future, said Athamar. He paused for a bit and then continued, "But Master Ambrose, you should be more aware of the current situation of the Nine Li race than I am. Zen can return to you if he wants, but how can you cultivate him right now? Apart from anything else, if the chaotic source world opens, do you have a ticket for him? Can you bring him there safely?" It was known that the Nine Li race used to be a large, dominant force. They couldn't be underestimated despite their downfall. Furthermore, there was more than one group like the one Ambrose led, which was the reason the Bering race always chased after them. That was also why the remaining members of the Nine Li race had to hide themselves from the world. As a result, it was impossible for them to expand or even accumulate resources. They now lived even more cautiously on the other shore in the world in general. It also went without saying that they couldn't enter the chaotic source world publicly. Sally and Hutton exchanged silent glances. They were worried about the tickets to the chaotic source world as well. As the outstanding talents of the younger generation of the Nine Li race, crossing the 13 stages in the Lust world wasn't a big problem for them. The only thing was, it was useless to improve only their souls. Therefore, they had to go to the chaotic source world. A trace of sadness appeared on Ambrose's face after he heard what Athamar said. Athamar felt sorry for Ambrose. After all, he highly respected Ambrose as his senior. It was just that Ambrose had lost his power and influence now. Well, when Zen joined the Oneness Sky Palace, I told him that he could leave at any time and we wouldn't stop him, but now is not the right time for him to return to the Nine Li race. If he is strong enough to lead the Nine Li race in the future, then I will have no objection, he continued. Suddenly, Ambrose's downcast face revealed a crafty smile. He replied, as you said, it's unrealistic for Zen to come back to the 9 Li race right now. I can't represent the entire 9 Li race, either. So, Zen can stay in the Oneness Sky Palace, but on one condition. Athamar's voice was solemn as he mouthed, please, go ahead. I have brought several clansmen here. Could you please take care of them and bring them into the chaotic source world? The smile on Ambrose's lips stretched a bit wider. Both Zen and Athamar were stunned. The two never expected that Ambrose had such a plan in his mind. Before Athamar could say anything, Ambrose sighed heavily and continued, alas, we have no other choice now. Even if we did get the tickets, it would still be hard for them to enter the chaotic source world. I will be deeply grateful if you can help them. Zen quickly turned to Athamar and said, Master Athamar, please report to the Oneness Sky Palace and recruit my clansmen. The tickets to the chaotic source world are precious, and I'll bear the cost. If the Oneness Sky Palace could not get the tickets, Zen planned to buy them from the ear mice. He believed that the shrewd ear mice would not refuse his request. It was quite some time before Athamar finally came to his senses. Ambrose is smart. He knows that the remaining people of the 9 Li race can't cultivate Zen, so he has no plan to take him back. On the one hand, he personally came to the Oneness Sky Palace to meet Zen. On the other hand, he wants the Oneness Sky Palace to recruit his clansmen. That's why he took the younger generation with him, he internally groaned. Under everyone's gaze, Athamar put on a smile and said, although the tickets to the chaotic source world are difficult to get, I can get 5 or 6 more. Zen, you don't have to worry about that. Sally, Hutton, and the other members of the 9 Li race beamed at Athamar's response. They didn't expect that he would agree so easily. After their discussion, Ambrose told Zen about the situation of the 9 Li race's remaining members to let him have a general understanding of it. It turned out that the situation of the 9 Li race was even worse than Zen had imagined. Almost all of the race's important inheritances were destroyed. After the Bering race had defeated them, some of their clansmen even used a few forbidden secret methods to change their blood, and cut off their ties to the 9 Li race. Meanwhile, all the other races that had once surrendered to the 9 Li race launched counterattacks. In reality, we have long lost hope. Leopold found us after a great deal of effort, but I scolded him. Chiyu sent the divine land away after he went through many hardships. Why should we bring it back? Leopold shouldn't have brought you back to the source world, said Ambrose regretfully. I didn't expect that Lorena would have such an excellent son. It's a pity that I can do nothing to help you. Sally and Hutton had previously told Ambrose what Zen had done on the other shore, and in that moment, he felt hopeful. Now that he had confirmed Zen's identity, he felt as if victory was in sight. As soon as he finished his words, he bowed and said goodbye to Athamar. He stood up and beckoned his companions to leave. Athamar saw them off. As for Zen, he just stood there and balled his fists. He had seen the statues of the 9 chieftains in the divine land. All of them were strong and powerful. Today, however, Ambrose was quite different from the statue in the divine land. Although Zen had already known that the 9 Li race had declined, he couldn't help but feel sad. He cried out, Grandpa Ambrose. Ambrose and the others paused. They turned around and smiled at Zen. I will rebuild the 9 Li race in your lifetime, Zen said seriously. A wild laugh escaped from Ambrose's lips. Then he croaked, I have been cursed, and I'm dying. I hope you can fulfill this promise. Then he, Leopold, and the others left the splendid palace without another word. Chapter 2935, Arrangement. Only Sally, Hutton, and a few other young members of the 9 Li race were left in the splendid palace. Although it was the first time they had personally met, Zen could feel a sense of kinship with them, coming from the same race. Ambrose had entrusted them to him. He was sure to take good care of them. Zen, can you really do it? Can you rebuild the 9 Li race? Sally asked, blinking her wide, innocent eyes. Growing up, she had heard about the past glory of the 9 Li race. Back then, there was no need for their people to find different places to hide. Every time worship day arrived, over 10,000 other races came to worship. If Chiyu was angered, the entire source world would tremble. But this glory mostly existed only in Sally's imagination. If only Zen could really make it become a reality. She was the youngest and most naive of them, after all. But Hutton and the others didn't think so. It wasn't that they doubted Zen's strength and talent, but they felt that such a great promise just could not be fulfilled. Chiyu was truly formidable, but in the end, he fell into defeat by the hands of the Bering race. The Bering race and the Divine Farmer race were no weaker than the 9 Li race in their prime. Even the Oneness Sky Palace didn't dare to act rashly against them. It could only be wishful thinking to consider Zen fighting them all alone. Sally, don't take it too seriously. You're daydreaming if you really expect the 9Li race to rise like it did back then. These are different times, said a young man beside her. Umar, Hutton called him out with a frown. Umar was one of the best members of the 9Li race that Ambrose had brought here. Am I wrong? The Grand Chieftain was once so powerful. But the Yellow Emperor defeated him too easily. Sure, Zen is powerful, but only within our generation. Is he capable of leading our entire race up the ranks? There's no way. The atmosphere grew grim. Pausing for a moment, Umar continued, he's just lucky to have outshone us on the other shore. Shut up. Don't forget who Zen is. Hutton's face darkened. On their way here, Leopold had told them that Zen's blood was much purer than theirs. If the 9Li race hadn't declined, he would have gone up higher than them in status. So what? The 9Li race has declined. His identity and status no longer matter. Umar continued his argument. Do you think it was because of our grandfather that Master Athamar was willing to accept us and help us get a ticket to the chaotic source world? Flames burned in Hutton's eyes as he stared Umar down. In the eyes of the super forces, the 9Li race was worthless. Their former honor and glory were things of the past. It was thanks to Zen that the Oneness Sky Palace was willing to help them enter the chaotic source world. It definitely wasn't for Ambrose's sake. Remember, Zen will be our young master from today forward, Hutton said fiercely. Umar was still not convinced. You want me to call him young master? Why, is he stronger than I am? After that, the aura in his body surged, and a statue of a fiendish beast appeared before him. It was his other shore token. On the way there, Sally and Hutton had been boasting about Thad's strength on the other shore. But now that Umar met him, he doubted Sally and Hutton's claims about his strength. Finally, he decided to challenge Zen and display his other shore token. The statue was a 4th grade other shore token from stage 13. Once it was activated, a malicious aura spread all over the splendid palace. Before the others could stop him, Umar turned into a gust of wind and rushed toward Zen, chopping down on his head with a single push of his palm. Take this. Being Ambrose's grandson, Umar was indeed a gifted man. The other shore power he had extracted from the statue reached 900 divine megatons. If struck by his palm, even a mountain would break in half, let alone a mere person. Umar, don't do it, stop. Everyone was taken aback and wide-eyed. They knew that Umar had a strange temper, but they were all told not to stir up any trouble on their way there. Little did they expect Umar to provoke Zen the minute Ambrose left them. Sally and her brother had witnessed Zen's strength on the other shore, but it was completely different from the source world. No one could tell whether or not he'd managed to resist Umar's strike. 900 divine megatons. That is good in stage 13. Zen's face remained dead calm. He didn't even bother to shift his feet. With a raise of his hand, the shade stone liquid attached itself to his right arm. Then, he slightly tilted his wrist and had Umar's hand precisely in his grasp. Puff! The splendid palace shook slightly before a fist-sized area cracked open right under Zen's feet. With that, Umar's fierce blow was stopped. Zen's grip was iron tight. Umar couldn't twist his hand out of it. The sight had everyone holding their breath. On the way there, Leopold had announced that if Zen made it to stage 13 on the other shore, his strength must be far greater than that of his peers. Back then, Umar only snorted at the exaggeration. The others weren't totally convinced either. But now, it seemed that even Leopold had greatly underestimated Zen. Even after taking Umar's all-out strike with a single hand, Zen was completely unharmed. No wonder could even imagine finding someone on the same level of strength. An exasperated sigh broke the silence. Hutton turned to Zen and said, Zen, please forgive Umar's rudeness. Still indifferent, Zen merely let go of the man's hand. He looked up to the ceiling of the splendid palace and said, we're all from the same race, so I will forgive him. Our people are facing a great decline, so we have to keep working harder. Grandpa Ambrose has entrusted all of you to me. I only have one request. He looked firmly at the group before continuing, don't ever give yourselves up. Hutton, Umar, and the rest looked at him complicatedly. The small world they had been hiding in was haunted by the Bering race. Neither the elders nor the younger generation were courageous enough. They ended up giving themselves away gradually. During his time in the Oneness Sky Palace, Zen did not forget where he came from. He was confident by nature. The others could sense his genuine pride and suddenly felt ashamed of themselves. Zen can make it happen. I choose to believe it. Sally chimed in eagerly. I believe it too, Hutton agreed. Soon, our 9Li race will rise again. And with that, the rest of them echoed with them. After sending Ambrose away, Athamar turned back to Zen and the rest. I'll send you up the Oneness Mountain first. Please follow me. It was the first time that the youth of the Nine Li race had left their elders. It was rather nerve-wracking to follow behind Athamar in silence. Standing on Athamar's huge sword, they looked curiously down at the Dragon City and the great mountains in the distance. Ever since they could remember, they had nestled in such a small world. Never had they really explored the vast source world. It was their first time stepping outside and witnessing firsthand the size of a super force. Once they returned to the Flow Sword sect, Athamar had applied for an independent courtyard house where he had the 6 members of the Nine Li race settle down. Even then, their background was sensitive. Although the Flow Sword sect was the Oneness Sky Palace's core area, Athamar had especially warned them to keep their identity hidden. If they needed anything, they had to turn to Zen. Chapter 2936, Treatment. It was a good thing that the several members of the Nine Li race didn't need to cultivate the Flow Strike, so there was no need for them to go out. For most of the time, they would put their souls of light on the other shore and cultivate it there. When Zen had first met with Sally, the girl had been upset about how she could get 2,000 soul pills. That meant the remaining members of the Nine Li race lacked money and therefore, it wasn't easy for them to improve their souls of light to reach stage 13. After the 6 members of the Nine Li race had settled down, Zen ordered them to enter the other shore the next day. The order confused Sally and Hutton a little. They wondered what Zen wanted to do. You are the members of my race, so you may take all of this as a gift from me, Zen spoke. Then, he took out 30 finger-sized chunks of soul crystal from the Sumeru space. When divided, each of the 6 of them could naturally get 5 finger-sized chunks of soul crystal. A chill ran down Sally's, Hutton's, and Umar's spines as soon as they sensed the pure aura that emanated from the soul crystal. They knew that Zen's physical body was so powerful that he could do anything he liked on the other shore, and that it wasn't difficult for him to obtain some other shore tokens and soul crystal. Even then, it still shocked them to see him casually take out 30 finger-sized chunks of soul crystal and just give them to them. Last time, they had entered the Grand Sky Temple and offered those soul pills which had been raised by the elders of their race after they had sold another shore token to the Earmouse race. Now, the 30 finger-sized chunks of soul crystal were worth 30 million soul pills, and it was absolutely impossible to buy so many chunks of soul crystal with even 30 million soul pills. Young master, the gift is too precious, Hutton muttered, his eyes glued to the soul crystal. He had indeed thought of refusing, but any soul of light that cultivated on the other shore couldn't resist such a temptation. After all, the soul crystal was almost the same as cultivation of the soul of light. Their soul cultivation could improve according to the amount of the soul crystal they absorbed. When I first entered the source world, I also wanted to search for the members of the Nine Li race, but the source world is too large. At that time, my cultivation base was low and I could not find anyone. After that, I have stayed in the Oneness Sky Palace to cultivate until now. I have made some achievements. I am glad to meet you all and give you the gift. If the rest members of the Nine Li race have any difficulty, please tell me. I will do my best to help all of you, said Zen. He knew that if he wanted to rebuild the Nine Li race, he would have to put a great amount of effort for it. Compared to that task, what he gave to the members of the Nine Li race was really nothing. After Zen had given them the soul crystal, he went back to his own house. A member from the Phoenix Palace informed him that Flamen invited him to meet her. As for Elvinia, it had been more than 10 days since she was taken away. Zen didn't know her situation, but since Flamen invited him now, he quickly rushed to the Phoenix Palace. The last time he left the Phoenix Palace, Flamen had already given him the token to enter it. This time, he naturally didn't need to break the fog with his eye of will. It wasn't long before he arrived. After he entered the Phoenix Palace, a maid ushered him into a palace on the side. When he arrived at the door of the palace, however, he heard Elvinia's loud screams from inside. "Get out of the way. I want to get out." In the palace, golden chains made of flames twined around Elvinia's hands and feet. No matter how much she struggled, the chains firmly locked her and she couldn't move at all. Several servants in the palace kept encouraging her, but they all looked distressed for her. How could this be? Zen asked with a frown. Lady Flamen has used many ways to treat Princess Elvinia, but they didn't work. She clamors to leave every day, and she just made Lady Flamen so angry that she left, the maid answered. It doesn't work well. It was well known that an injury on the soul was truly difficult to cure. After last time when Milo had used the taboo method, he still hadn't returned to the Flow Sword sect yet. When Zen and Elvinia returned, Flamen was confident about curing Elvinia. Zen also thought that it might not be that hard to cure her, but he didn't expect that there was no progress at all these days. Elvenia still struggled, but she couldn't do whatever she wanted because she was not on the other shore now. Zen walked towards her. Elvenia, who had been burning with anger, was stunned to see him. Her hysterical shouts quickly calmed down at the sight of him. She looked at him and pleaded, "Zen, you are here. Take me out of here. My mother wants to kill me." "Lady Flamen is your mother. Why would she want to kill you?" Zen asked curiously. "She wants to kill me," Elvenia repeated firmly. At that moment, Zen didn't notice that Flamen was already behind him until she spoke. "I've been trying to get rid of the messy memories in her mind, but a considerable amount of memories have been integrated into her memory flame and become a part of her." It wasn't hard for Flamen to remove memories, but the purified being's memories had been integrated with Elvenia. Deleting those memories would be equal to destroying Elvenia. That was why Elvenia believed that Flamen wanted to kill her, but in reality, Flamen only wanted to remove the memories of Teague. In Elvenia's point of view though, she still believed that her mother intended to kill her. "Lady Flamen, why did you invite me to come over?" asked Zen. Although Zen had controlled the reincarnation land in Divine Land, his method of dealing with or curing souls was far off from Flamen's advanced techniques. He didn't think he could help much. Yet, she still summoned him, so there had to be a reason. "I have to remove the memories when she is awake, but those messy memories which don't belong to her are hidden in the deepest part of her memory flame. I can't dig them out," said Flamen. When Elvenia became a purified being, she didn't recognize or talk to anyone except for Zen. After careful consideration, Flamen decided to ask Zen for help. She had planned to invite him to help her since the very beginning, but she realized that he had just gotten out of the other shore. Thus, she waited for a few more days. "I will try my best to do what I can," Zen promised. He knew he also had to take some responsibility for Elvenia's bad situation, though back then, Elvenia insisted on entering the Grand Sky Temple and he couldn't stop her. Then again, the only reason Zen was able to leave the dark region was because he had Elvenia to rely on. When Zen had agreed to help Flamen, she left the palace for a moment and came back with 3 old men. The 3 old men quietly took their respective positions, and then a big array on the ground began to flash. The appearance of the light horrified Elvenia, who had just calmed down. "Zen, they want to kill me again. Kill them for me." Of course, Zen knew that such a kind of fear was out of instinct, but the pleading look on her face made him sympathize with her. Zen sat up straight in front of Elvenia and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm Elvenia," she exclaimed. Zen shook his head. "You are not Elvenia. If you are, you won't be afraid," he said. "I'm not Elvenia." She was a little confused by Zen's words. "Then who am I?" "You are Teague, a creature from the dark region. I have destroyed your race. I am the one who killed all of the pig-faced monsters," Zen gravely said. Teague's memories only occupied a small part of Elvenia's memories. If Zen hadn't mentioned such things, Elvenia wouldn't have remembered them. He had verified it in the dark region. So when Zen mentioned that one memory, some of Teague's memories flashed through Elvenia's mind. It wouldn't be so easy for Teague to forget the fact that his race had been destroyed, nor could he simply set aside his resentment for Zen. Elvenia's pretty face suddenly turned ferocious, as if she wanted to swallow him. "How dare you destroy my race? I'll kill you," she roared. At that point, Zen quickly said to Flamen, "Lady Flamen, it's the time." Delight filled Flamen's eyes. How could she be willing to miss this opportunity? She winked at the 3 old men, and the array in the palace was fully activated. Then, Flamen's hand transformed into a claw and covered Elvenia's head. Chapter 2937, Counterattack. It wouldn't have been wise to make Elvenia angry were they on the other shore. But they were in the Phoenix Palace now. Here, no holds were barred. With Zen's stimulation, Teague's memories, hidden in the depths of Elvenia's mind and body, were drawn out in a steady stream. "Puny humans, the blood assembly will grind you into minced meat soon enough." Elvenia's voice changed. The blood power in her body started to burn, wisps of golden flames threatening to flare out. The fact that her inner world was emitting energy like this was a dangerous signal. "Lady Flamen, be careful. Her inner world may explode," Zen reminded. If Elvenia's inner world exploded, Zen and Flamen wouldn't be hurt, but Elvenia would die. Flamen only scoffed. She seemed to have been prepared for this. She touched Elvenia's belly with her hand. The energy that was gathering in Elvenia's belly faded away instantly. Then she flicked Elvenia's head several times. Rays of light shot out from her fingers and drilled into Elvenia's black hair. Elvenia held her head and screamed as the agony grew more intense. It's time. Now. Flamen barked out. The three old men closed their eyes, and the array became more powerful. Flamen then dragged out some wisps of white light from Elvinia's head. Whoosh! Dragging the white light, Flamen stepped back into the center of the array and pressed her hand on the ground. The wisps of white light interwove together, turning into a milky white flame. Zen stared at the white flame, his eyebrows raised. It's the memory flame. The white flame was very dim, but still emitted a fierce aura. It was clearly the memory flame Teague had left in Elvinia's soul. Flamen had extracted it using a technique Zen had never encountered before. Hurry up, seal the memory flame, Flamen ordered. She knew that with Teague being a purified being, his memory flame must contain some very precious memories. Memories about the blood assembly alone would be very valuable, so she wanted to leave them to Eastern Emperor Tai. However, just then, the flame started to blur and turn into Teague's original form. As soon as he was fully materialized, Teague only sneered before disappearing. The faces of Flamen and the three old men fell. The memory flame disappeared so fast that they weren't able to seal it up. Elvinia, dripping with sweat, finally collapsed to the ground, her arms still strung up by the fire chains. Lady Flamen, could you put Elvinia down now? Zen asked. Flamen turned around, her face softening. They might have failed to seal the memory flame, but at least Teague's cursed memories were out of Elvinia. Elvinia fortunately didn't lose her memories, but her memories had been a jumbled mess after mixing with Teague's. It would return to normal eventually once all the chaos was resolved. With a flick of Flamen's finger, the two fire chains disappeared. She walked over to help Elvinia up and then turned to Zen with a smile. She'll be okay, thanks to you. I've done extractions many times before, but that pig-faced monster was pretty sly. I couldn't get him out. Lady Flamen, you are being too polite. I did nothing, Zen replied with a smile. I'll take Elvinia to rest. You seldom come to the Phoenix Palace. Do you want to visit your friends? Flamen asked, giving Zen a meaningful look. She stressed the word, friend, on purpose. She was a smart woman. She knew that the relationship between Zen and Laquisha and the other two wasn't just friendship. By experience, she knew it was normal for a man to have several concubines. Flamen herself was not the only concubine of Eastern Emperor Tai, after all. What mattered to her was Zen's principal wife, Letitia. She had even privately asked Laquisha about her once. Elvinia was Eastern Emperor Tai's daughter. If she married Zen, her status would still be very important. Zen nodded in response to Flamen's question. Since he had come to the Phoenix Palace, he must pay a visit to his wives. Elvinia had mentioned to Zen that Laquisha was beset with an unusual condition. Her affliction had caused a fire in the Phoenix Palace, prompting Elvinia to arrange an independent palace for her. Laquisha's preternatural flame was called Sprite Fire. Only those who had the fire crow's blood could get it. Flamen ordered a maid to take Zen to the Heavenly Cultivation Palace in the north part of the Phoenix Palace. A commotion was currently breaking out at the open space in front of the Heavenly Cultivation Palace. Dozens of people had gathered around the cause at the center of it all. A tall woman and a young man facing off in apparent combat, except the former was simply evading the latter. The young man and the tall woman had just entered the Sea of Truth, and had not merged with any other shore token. Their cultivation levels were about the same, but the man's martial arts were obviously much stronger than those of the woman. The tall woman wouldn't dare to fight head-on and could only resort to dodging attacks. This courtyard is only over 100 feet wide. You can't run forever. The young man waved the long sword in his hand toward the tall woman. When the tall woman saw this, a fierce look suddenly appeared in her eyes. This time, instead of retreating, she flipped the long blood-red sword in her hand. If she had to die, then so be it. But she was bringing him with her. Lavender, don't risk it. It's okay to lose. We can just leave the Phoenix Palace. Laquisha and Nellie cried out, turning pale. The tall woman was Lavender, and the man challenging her was called Ahmad, a direct descendant of the Phoenix Palace. Under the protection of Elvinia, Laquisha, Nellie and Lavender received more resources than many direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace, even more so after Laquisha was given a palace to herself. This apparent special treatment made the direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace jealous and resentful. Everything would have been fine if Elvinia had been at the Phoenix Palace. She was the most outstanding among the young generation in the Oneness Mountain, and enjoyed Eastern Emperor Tai's love. No one could outshine her. But Elvinia had been away for quite some time now. The news that she was trapped on the other shore spread throughout the Phoenix Palace. Many people thought she wouldn't come back. As time passed, the direct descendants started coming up with some evil ideas. And so Ahmad was sent to anger the three women. Lavender knew what the direct descendants were up to. She had quite the temper, and she was now starting to lose control of it. Although they were trying hard not to engage, the direct descendants kept provoking them deliberately. They had no choice but to fight back. Lavender's strength was inferior to Ahmad's, so she had been at a disadvantage since the fight began. But she was much more experienced in battle. She noticed that Ahmad was avoiding anything life-threatening, so she fought back with deadly moves. Before long, she had taken the upper hand. Chapter 2938, Get into Trouble. Ahmad grew increasingly flustered when he faced the deadly momentum of Lavender's sword strikes. When two powerful warriors confronted each other in a neck-and-neck battle, it was hard to decide which one would overpower the other. But now, it seemed it was hard for him to turn the tables in his favor since his momentum wavered compared to his opponent. Ahmad should have easily defeated Lavender had it not been for her fierce attack. What's going on? Ahmad's strength far surpasses that of the woman, but how come he is no match for her? We'll make a fool of ourselves today. This woman is crazy, she has no regard for her life. She's cheating, exclaimed the frustrated direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace. Nellie and Lavender shared the same personality traits, so it wasn't hard for her to understand Lavender's actions. Overhearing the disrespectful comments of these direct descendants, Nellie retorted curtly, "Every warrior fights with their life on the line in every battle they take part in. If you have never experienced it, you have no right to say she is cheating. It's ridiculous." Only after the direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace had entered the other shore would they experience this world in all its cruelty. Even in the early stages of the other shore, they probably couldn't understand it. After all, they would be under the protection of the Oneness Sky Palace's temple after reaching stage 4. Among the many obvious examples was Elvenia. She managed to pass 12 stages and reach stage 13 without a hitch. Only until she stepped foot in the dark region, did she realize what it felt like to have a near-death experience. Whoosh! Under the heat of Lavender's relentless attacks, Ahmad flinched constantly. After a while, he stabilized his steps and gained back his lost control. He reached out for his long sword and gave it a swift flick. In response to his gesture, it produced 9 sword shadows in front of him. 9 World Mantra Sword. The 9 World Mantra Sword was a supreme swordsmanship manual. It was exclusively taught to the direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace. Even the disciples who had just entered the other shore could flaunt tremendous power by using it. Although Lavender had also practiced swordsmanship in her youth, she had been more used to using a long spear as a weapon before she entered the Source World, which was why she had to start from scratch when she came to the Phoenix Palace. If she didn't defeat Ahmad now, she might never get another opportunity to do so. Broken World, Original World, Orchid World. Ahmad stood his ground and kept advancing towards her effortlessly. He showed no signs of backing down, his movements were flawless. Even though Lavender tried her best to land an effective sword strike, each of her attacks was easily deflected by Ahmad. Due to countless failed attempts, she was forced to take a step back each time. She was unable to lay a single scratch on him. Watching Ahmad regain his strong position in the battle, the direct descendants began to cheer him on. "That's it, Ahmad, hang in there. If you win over this woman, they will be forced to leave. Woman, with talents like yours, you don't deserve what the Phoenix Palace offers." Hearing them encourage Ahmad and mock her in the background only made Lavender feel more inferior to him. Her expression darkened as she bit her lip and glared back at Ahmad. She had been giving it her all, but she still lacked the required strength to defeat him. Ahmad's swordsmanship was just too flawless to counter. Swift World, Crossing World. Ahmad's sword force grew more and more ferocious with time. It was like a monster, slowly opening its mouth to reveal its countless hidden fangs. Annihilation World. He looked up with fiery eyes and slashed his sword at Lavender relentlessly. As she watched the upcoming attack in close range, her face began to lose its color. "Lavender, let it go. Just surrender, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. It's fine, we can just leave the Phoenix Palace." LaQuisha and Nellie shouted their pleas helplessly at her. However, deep down, Lavender knew it all too well, she would be unable to deflect this sword strike. Even if she tried, she wouldn't be able to dodge this one in time. If the sword were to pierce through her, she would suffer irreversible damage, even if she didn't die from it. Just as the sword charged ruthlessly towards her, 2 fingers appeared out of nowhere and clasped the blade securely in their grip. Under the severe pressure coming from the fingers, the blade caved in. Cracks resembling cobwebs formed on the edge of Ahmad's sword, and it was crushed. Bracing for impact, Lavender didn't dare turn around to see who intervened. But as soon as she saw the hand that foiled the strike, a longing smile appeared on her face. In an instant, she turned around and embraced Zen into a tight hug. Upon seeing Zen, Laquisha and Nellie jumped in excitement and rushed to his side. "Who are you, and how dare you break my sword?" His expression screamed anger and confusion when Ahmad watched his sword get smashed between the two fingers. Zen eyed him up expressionlessly and asked, "Lavender, why were you fighting with him?" By the time Zen arrived, Lavender had moved into a dead end from retreating continuously. The intense battle between them could by no means be compared to simple sparring. Lavender didn't like depending on other people to protect her. She didn't want to count on Zen to stand up for her each time she was backed into a corner. She replied in a calm tone, "Don't worry. It's nothing." However, Nellie stepped up and briefed Zen all about it. "These people want to force us out of the Phoenix Palace. They've been trying to provoke us these past few days." Hearing the explanation, Zen understood the matter and gave a slight nod. "We have all the right to do so. Our Phoenix Palace only accepts direct descendants as disciples. These three women should not be the exception. How can they be so lucky as to be allowed to cultivate here? They even take up resources that are rightfully ours. Yes, we only have enough for ourselves." The direct descendants lodged numerous complaints one after the other. Zen's cultivation base far exceeded theirs, but they weren't intimidated by him. Besides, no one would dare to touch them as long as they remained in the Phoenix Palace. However, they were unaware of the fact that Zen had defeated Elvinia in this very place just a few months ago. Closely listening to their complaints, Zen nodded agreeably and gave them a gentle smile. He turned to Lavender and said, "Since that's the case, let's leave." Before coming to the Phoenix Palace, Lavender, Laquisha and Nellie cultivated peacefully in the Dragon City. However, Elvinia had insisted on them coming here instead. Zen didn't value the resources available in the Phoenix Palace at all, so he thought it was fine the three women left here. The three women had developed a healthy relationship with Elvinia over time. Since Elvinia was away from the Phoenix Place at the moment, they had no reason to stay either, so they agreed obediently to leave with Zen. "So, it's decided. Let's go back to pack up our belongings. We'll leave here," Nellie said as she shot a cold glare at the arrogant direct descendants. Just as Zen turned to leave with them, he was stopped by Ahmad, who shouted, "Just wait a minute there. Do you honestly think you can just walk out of here after you broke my 9-world mantra sword?" As a direct descendant of the Phoenix Palace, he had always thought of himself to be superior to others. Moreover, he had close connections with the higher-ups of the Phoenix Palace. Ahmad's mother, Lady Jean, enjoyed a high position in the Phoenix Palace, while his elder brother was gifted with immense strength and belonged to the land of sword grief. It didn't matter even if he had not reached the other shore. His status and connections made him a respectable figure in the Phoenix Palace. It boiled his blood how Zen had just waltzed in between his battle when he was about to defeat Lavender. Moreover, Zen had smashed his 9-world mantra sword into pieces. There was no way he could allow Zen to get away with it all now. "Then what do you want me to do? Do you want me to offer you another sword to replace that one?" A smile of discontent appeared on Zen's face. In response to Zen's statement, Ahmad laughed viciously and stated, "Do I look like the sort of person who would care about a sword? You're highly mistaken if you think you can destroy my sword just because you are stronger in cultivation base than me. My elder brother's cultivation base is higher than yours. Does that mean he can crush you just the same?" Naturally, Ahmad was unable to challenge Zen since he hadn't broken through to the other shore realm yet. Zen was a lot tougher in comparison. But his elder brother, Chance, happened to be in the Phoenix Palace at this very moment. Ahmad had already informed him of the situation through a communication token. It would only be a matter of time before Chance made his appearance on the scene. And of course, he was coming to avenge the insult his little brother had to face because of Zen. Ahmad was less than 20 years old. In Zen's eyes, he was no better than a naive child. How could he pay any heed to the empty claims of a child? Just as Zen grabbed Lavender's hand and prepared to leave, another person appeared at the entrance of the Heavenly Cultivation Palace. This man had a dark skin tone, and his arms were long and significantly bulky. His eyes gave the sharpened vibe of a viper as he stared in Zen's direction. He stepped into the Heavenly Cultivation Palace and stationed himself in front of Zen to block his path. There were traces of disdain smeared across his charred black face as he glared at him. "Which one of these people crushed your sword, Ahmad?" The man who stood before them was Chance, Ahmad's big brother. "It's him. He crushed my sword, and he's not a member of the Phoenix Palace either," Ahmad blurted out as he pointed at Zen. He peered over at Zen's face to observe his reaction to the situation. He had expected Zen's face to turn as white as a sheet when faced with his big brother. After all, Chance had entered the land of sword grief and was a cultivator of the chaotic source realm. However, Zen's reaction had disappointed him. He showed no signs of shock as his expression remained unchanged. To address the matter maturely, Zen spoke in a calm tone. While it's good to spar with each other sometimes, you should not encourage your brother's behavior when it's wrong. Your brother was about to kill Lavender. I had no other choice but to stop him. A warrior of the chaotic source realm was naturally stronger than Zen. His cultivation base and restraint were not to be underestimated. However, Chance shook off Zen's attempts to dissolve the issue between them. The corners of his mouth turned into a sinister smile as he said, "The woman you defended is not a direct descendant of the Phoenix Palace, so it doesn't matter if she's dead. As an outsider, how dare you stop my brother and break his sword? You must have a death wish." Chapter 2939, A Head-to-Head Battle. The blood of Eastern Emperor Tai ran through all the direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace. Their status rested on a combination of blood, talent, and strength. Chance was slightly inferior to Elvenia in terms of talent, but he had been strong enough to reach the chaotic source realm. Those who had entered the land of sword grief didn't take the ordinary disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace seriously. Moreover, Lavender, Laquisha, and Nellie weren't from the direct line of the Phoenix Palace, so Chance thought it wouldn't really matter if he killed them. As for Zen, Chance only knew that he was the core disciple of a certain mountain. But whichever mountain Zen was from, Chance decided it didn't matter. He wasn't afraid of Zen at all. Chance was unaware of the degree to which Zen had refrained from showing his true power in the Phoenix Palace. Zen had restrained himself because he didn't want to make trouble. Although Ahmad had almost killed Lavender, Zen didn't take revenge. However, when Zen heard Chance's words, anger flashed in his eyes. The direct descendants of Eastern Emperor Tai looked proud and scornful. They thought it was unforgivably bold for an outsider like Zen to interfere in the affairs of the Phoenix Palace. Regardless of how powerful Zen was, he was no match for him. He had crushed Ahmad's sword, but now that Chance was here, he was about to be defeated. Ahmed became more arrogant with his brother's support. He said to Zen, "You are a mere disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace. How dare you come here to flaunt your prowess? Is it because the Phoenix Palace has always kept a low profile?" The other disciples nodded vigorously, agreeing with Ahmed. Indeed, what a display of rudeness and arrogance. No one is allowed to come to the Phoenix Palace without permission. The direct descendants present had felt more secure since Chance arrived. They felt that with Chance, they were superior to Zen. A few of them recognized Zen from his fight with Elvenia in the Heavenly Cultivation Palace. But since Elvenia had not yet reached the chaotic source realm, they believed she was much weaker than Chance. Lavender, Laquisha, and Nellie looked upset. Nellie tugged at Zen's sleeve and said, "Let's go." Zen didn't move. He knew that even if he had been inclined to leave, the disciples of the Phoenix Palace wouldn't let him go without a fight. So he gently removed Nellie's hand and turned to Chance. Calmly he said, "You're right. I do have a death wish. Let's fight." Chance lifted a long black eyebrow in surprise. Given Zen's cultivation base, he should have understood the importance of reaching the chaotic source realm, as Chance had done. Moreover, the chaotic source world was about to open soon. Zen clearly knew that Chance was powerful enough to beat him. And yet, Zen dared to challenge him to a fight. Either he was an idiot or he had something up his sleeve. "You want a fight?" Chance asked, laughing as though Zen had told a very funny joke. "What makes you think I'd even bother? You're not qualified to fight me." The other Phoenix Palace disciples joined in Chance's laughter. They were all familiar with the vast difference in the level of strength between the warriors who had reached the chaotic source realm and those who had not. Chance was stronger than anyone present, including Zen. But apparently Zen didn't understand that. They thought he was being ridiculous. "Chance, teach him a lesson," one of the disciples called out. "Right, show him he's making a mistake. Make him sorry he ever came here." Zen scowled. His eyes had narrowed dangerously at the repeated taunts of the disciples. He turned to Lavender, Laquisha, and Nellie, and said quietly to them, "Back off. Give me some space." "Zen, what are you planning?" Lavender murmured, looking concerned. Like everyone else, the three women had heard of the incredible strength of the warriors who had reached the chaotic source realm in the Heavenly Cultivation Palace. The bodies and souls of such warriors had been greatly enhanced. Indeed, it could be argued that they had transformed altogether into a different, stronger being. Lavender, Laquisha, and Nellie had always trusted in Zen's strength. But this wasn't the Divine Land. It was the Source World, and here, there were plenty of mighty warriors from various sects and races. Zen saw her expression and smiled to ease her fear. Don't worry, all right. Lavender nodded and retreated with Laquisha and Nellie. Zen's confidence was a relief. It renewed their faith in his strength. At a gesture from Chance, Ahmad and the other direct descendants of Phoenix Palace also stepped back. Zen and Chance stood alone in the middle of a wide, empty space. Since he had reached the chaotic source realm, Chance had never bothered to fight anyone who hadn't. In his opinion, the warriors at the other shore realm were all beneath him, and it would be demeaning to fight them. But today, for his brother's sake, he would set that aside and teach Zen a lesson. He was absolutely confident in his own superiority. He thought he'd be able to beat Zen within seconds. Let's get this over with, he said, sneering. It will be a shame if anyone in the land of sword grief realizes that I'm fighting with a junior like you. Without further ado, he lunged forward and threw a punch at Zen. After undergoing the chaotic source reinforcement, his fist was a weapon in itself, a force to be reckoned with. The power behind his punch was as explosive as a volcanic eruption. Indeed, that single punch should be enough to kill Zen if it landed. Chance expected Zen to try to dodge the punch, and readied himself to strike again. To his astonishment, however, Zen just stood there without budging. Chance felt a stab of confusion. Why was this man so confident? Was there something he hadn't seen? Something that made Zen more dangerous than he seemed? Chance's arm drove forward. In response, Zen lifted his hand to grasp his fist. The shade stone liquid surged in Zen's body, and his spine and arm turned dark. The direct descendants of the Phoenix Palace chattered to each other with excitement and anticipation, wondering what would happen next. Doesn't he know how terrifying a warrior of the chaotic source realm is? That one punch is enough to kill him if it's a direct hit. He's trying to block the punch with his bare hand. He's crazy. Everyone stared with wide eyes as Chance's fist smashed into Zen's palm. There was a crisp, thunderous clapping sound. The disciples closed their eyes and raised their hands instinctively to protect their ears at the deafening boom of the impact. The power of the collision spread outwards in all directions, tearing through everything in its way. The onlookers let out cries of pain. They felt as though the front of their bodies had been slapped with something hot and hard. As the sound ceased and the shock wave of the impact passed, they cautiously opened their eyes and looked at the two fighters. Zen was still standing, holding Chance's fist firmly in one outstretched hand. Chance's face was distorted with shock. Zen grinned at him. Now will you take this seriously? Draw your sword. He shoved Chance backwards, releasing his fist. Chance staggered several steps backwards, still looking stunned. His astonishment was mirrored in the faces of the direct descendants of Phoenix Palace, who had fully expected Zen to be killed by the full force of Chance's blow. The disciples realized that they and Chance had underestimated Zen. Chance couldn't believe what had just happened. He had used over 900 divine megatons of the other shore power in his punch. There was no way an inferior like Zen could have resisted that. But somehow, Zen had not only blocked the punch, but had also done so with seeming ease. Chance would never have admitted it, but he felt a small tremor of fear. He had landed a killing blow, but Zen had not been injured in the slightest. He realized that although Zen hadn't been through the chaotic source reinforcement, he also had extraordinary physical strength and must be taken seriously. But Chance did not let any of his thoughts show on his face. Draw my sword, no need. He said grandly. He chuckled and rushed towards Zen again. The other shore power flowed continuously from his cinnabar field. This time, he used over 1,000 divine megatons of force. This was the limit of the physical body below the chaotic source realm. Chance himself wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, and neither would Zen. There was a series of booming sounds as he landed one punch after another. Again, the onlookers protected their eyes and ears. Chance summoned all his raging power, and each blow had the power to split mountains and part seas. Zen remained deadly calm. He raised both arms to meet Chance's fists. He matched him in speed and strength, managing to deflect every single blow. In seconds, Chance had thrown at least 10 punches, and Zen blocked every single one without flinching. Chapter 2940, The Weightless Mountain. After giving some time to adapt, Zen's ability to control the shade stone liquid only grew stronger. It could be absorbed into his viscera, bones, or skin. When he resisted his enemies, he could shift the impact to the position where the shade stone liquid was placed. With the liquid, he attempted to take every strike from Chance. Even though Chance released 1,000 divine megatons of force, Zen blocked all his attacks with ease. I told you to take the fight more seriously. Show me what you've got. Zen called out as he looked at Chance with calm eyes. Chance knew Zen was a disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace who hadn't reached the chaotic source realm, but Zen appeared so calm as though Chance was an ordinary warrior. It was completely beyond his expectations. Zen's leisurely attitude hurt his pride. He began growing restless. Chance refused to yield or heed Zen's words. Instead, he gently slid his feet, moving particularly elegantly as he charged at Zen. No matter how strong the disciple was, everyone had a limit. Chance refused to believe that Zen could continue resisting his attacks for long. But under Chance's rain of punches, Zen showed no sign of panic. Not only could he block Chance's fists, but he also managed to launch his counterattack from time to time. In terms of force alone, Zen was incredibly strong when he used the Strength God Totem. Each and every punch he threw at his opponent contained over 1,000 divine megatons of force. Besides, the Shade Stone liquid strengthened his body dramatically. His counterattacks weren't to be underestimated. But Chance was a powerful warrior of the chaotic source realm. His body was far stronger than any opponent Zen had faced before. Ordinary warriors of the other shore realm would have been torn to shreds if they took one of Zen's hits. But Chance's body was like iron. Zen couldn't even make a dent. Loud thuds resounded every time their punches met. From the noises they made, anyone could easily assume that two giants were brawling. The exchange of blows continued as they moved across the area. The other disciples knew it was good to distance themselves from the intense fight. Every time the two collided, the impact caused something like a violent explosion. Anyone standing too close could easily be caught in the impact and get injured. Several disciples already had cheeks that were bulging out because of the blast wave. As they watched the fierce combat, all of them were stunned frozen, their jaws hanging open with shock. They all knew that Chance was a powerful warrior. But what about Zen? The caliber of the fight was nothing short of a fight between two powerful warriors of the chaotic source realm. But the fact that Zen hadn't even reached the chaotic source realm in spite of his power was bewildering. How on earth did he come to possess such great power? Zen has become stronger once again, Nellie remarked, her eyes twinkling. He gets stronger every time I see him, Lavender added. He never seems to stop improving himself. Among the three, Lavender was the one who had been in Zen's company for the longest period of time. He had grown stronger, all the way from the lower world to the upper world, and from the universe to the divine land. Lavender was used to seeing his extraordinary performance in battle. In the back of his mind, even Chance was greatly shocked. He had a growing suspicion that Zen wasn't human at all. Is this guy's body made out of some legendary weapon? He wondered to himself. While Chance's body was extremely strong after going through chaotic source reinforcement, it couldn't resist any attack indefinitely. After a certain amount of damage, his body would weaken like any other. If his fatigue reached a limit, his physical strength would decline rapidly. On the contrary, Zen still seemed in high spirits even after taking so many punches. He didn't look the least bit exhausted. Back off. All of a sudden, Chance lowered himself, tilting his shoulder. Gathering his strength, he threw another punch, forcing Zen back and buying time to rest. Zen then retreated, sliding back on the ground to put some distance between them. His movements were gentle and light, his face as calm as still water. There were no signs of fatigue in his actions. Most of the power from Chance's attacks was blocked by the Shade Stone liquid. Zen's body structure was essentially different from Ahmad's. Zen would have the advantage if they were to fight in protracted combat. The direct descendants watching from the side had noticed the difference in their states. It wasn't hard to tell who had the upper hand during such a fight. Ahmad, your brother seems exhausted, one of them remarked. Nonsense. Ahmad rebutted furiously. Just wait and see. My brother will cut him in half. Ahmad's brother was a role model to him, a goal he had pursued all his life. He refused to see his brother fall to defeat before a mere, unknown disciple. Chance's eyes were now fixated on Zen. They were as malicious as a serpent's. Although he hadn't activated the other shore token to its extreme, his opponent didn't seem to have done so either. Now, Zen seemed unfathomable. It was a ridiculous feeling, Chance thought. His long arms drooped to the side, and his fingers gently brushed against his space ring. Blood began gurgling out of it. But instead of dripping onto the ground, it flowed until it formed a shape of a snowflake. Chance then pulled out a great, long, red sword from the center of the figure. Since you insist that I use my sword, it would be rude of me not to, Chance said, raising his weapon arrogantly. I must warn you, however, my sword has no conscience. If it cuts your head off by accident, don't complain about it on your way to perdition. As Chance brandished the red sword, the other shore token he carried in his inner world also emerged. It turned out to be a tiny mountain. It was the weightless mountain, another shore token from stage 14. Numerous tall and dangerous mountains were scattered on stage 14 of the Desire World. The mountain spirit of them could be integrated by warriors as another shore token. Despite its light weight, the mountain spirit held incredible power, standing out from many other shore tokens of the strengthening type. The weightless mountain had divided grades. Chance's weightless mountain was superior, containing more divine megatons of force than any ordinary mountain spirit. His display of this token showed a clear desire to end the battle as soon as possible. With a gentle shake of the weightless mountain, Chance's aura strengthened drastically. When he took a heavy step forward, his red sword slashed at Zen as he approached. Swish! His sword left a long, red trail in the air. It seemed to carry the power to cut through anything in the world. In the face of Chance's ferocity, Zen's face turned grim. The realization hit him, he couldn't take the strike head-on. Withdrawing his body, Zen leapt high into the air and evaded Chance's sharp hit. But now that Chance had displayed his other shore token, he surely wasn't going to give Zen any chance to run away. 9 World Mantra, binding him, Chance gently shook his sword's blade, making its radiance twist and shoot at Zen aggressively like a nimble gecko. The 9 World Mantra sword was a supreme swordsmanship manual unique to the Phoenix Palace. With Chance's formidable strength, the power of his skill was thousands of times greater than when Ahmad had used it. Zen couldn't find a single flaw in his attack. As Zen retreated, he continued moving and dodging, but failed to get out of the binding force's range. It was an unavoidable technique, even for Zen, because the skill reached a wider area instead of a single point. There was so much going on that Zen could barely process the situation. But because he couldn't keep dodging, his right eye suddenly flashed with a red light. Initially, Chance had planned to completely eliminate Zen in a single attack. But as soon as he spotted the red light, his heart skipped a beat, and his attack waned. Zen seized the opportunity to twist his body abruptly and distance himself from his opponent.